Welcome to Dark History. Here, we journey into forgotten kingdoms, lost empires, and shadows that time tried to erase. Tonight, the desert of Nubia calls. The sands shift over ruins of stone, pyramids smaller but more numerous than Egypt's, temples guarded by lion gods, and queens who defied the might of Rome. This is not the Egypt you know. This is Kush, the black kingdom of the Nile, fierce, mysterious, and eternal. The faint sound of wind howls through the ruins. If you seek forgotten voices and hidden truths, you have come to the right place. Subscribe to Dark History, and let the shadows of the past guide you. Chapter 1. The Land Between Two Worlds. Geography and Origins of Nubia and Kush. When we think about the great civilizations of the ancient world, our minds almost immediately go to Egypt with its towering pyramids, Mesopotamia with its ziggurats, or Greece with its philosophers. Yet just to the south of Egypt, nestled along the winding path of the Nile River, there existed another cradle of civilization that flourished for thousands of years, Nubia, and later, the Kingdom of Kush. These lands were not only neighbors to Egypt, they were in many ways equals, rivals at times, partners at others, but always a distinct culture with their own power, religion, and legacy. To understand their story, we must begin where all great civilizations do, with the land itself. The gift of the Nile, but different. The Nile is often called the lifeblood of Egypt, but it was equally the lifeblood of Nubia, stretching thousands of miles from Central Africa to the Mediterranean Sea. The Nile carved out a ribbon of fertility across the desert sands. Yet, in Nubia, the river behaved differently than in Egypt, where Egypt enjoyed wide floodplains ideal for farming. Nubia was marked by narrower valleys, rocky terrain, and treacherous rapids, known as cataracts. These cataracts were natural stone barriers that divided the river into sections, creating challenges for navigation, but also offering protection. This geography shaped the destiny of the Nubians. While Egypt's wide plains encouraged massive farms and centralized power, Nubia's rugged landscape encouraged resilience, adaptability, and a society built around both agriculture and trade. It also meant Nubia was rich in something Egypt lacked: resources. Gold, ivory, ebony, and exotic animals were abundant here, and from the earliest days, Egypt looked to Nubia as a land of wealth. A land between worlds. Nubia was more than just Egypt's southern neighbor. It was a bridge between the Mediterranean world and sub-Saharan Africa. Caravans from the African interior brought incense, leopard skins, ostrich feathers, and slaves through Nubia, while Egyptian merchants brought linen, papyrus, and finished goods southward. Nubia became a cultural crossroads, absorbing influences from both north and south, while shaping a unique identity of its own. For this reason, Nubia was sometimes called the land of the bow, because its archers were legendary throughout the ancient world. Egyptian texts often spoke of Nubian archers as fierce warriors, prized as mercenaries, and feared as enemies. Even as early as 3000 BCE, Egyptian kings sent expeditions into Nubia, not only to trade but also to conquer. Seeing Nubia as both opportunity and threat, the first settlers of the Nile. South archaeologists have traced the roots of Nubian culture back to prehistoric times. Long before the pyramids rose in Egypt, pastoralists and farmers lived along the banks of the Nile in what is now southern Egypt and northern Sudan. These early Nubians were cattle herders, hunters, and small-scale farmers who gradually developed distinct pottery styles, burial traditions, and ways of life. By around 3500 BCE, the Nubian A-group culture flourished in Lower Nubia, the northernmost part of Nubia, closer to Egypt. They built elaborate graves with goods inside, showing a society that already valued status and ceremony. Their pottery, decorated with intricate designs, was among the finest in the ancient world. Trade with Egypt was common, but it was not always peaceful. Egyptian records describe raids, battles, and at times outright campaigns into Nubian lands. Still, the A group left behind evidence of a proud and independent people. Further south, the C group culture would later emerge around 2400 BCE. These people lived in small communities, raised cattle, and traded heavily with Egypt. Unlike Egypt, which quickly became a land of monumental stone architecture, the Nubians of the C group remained tied to their pastoral roots, building smaller-scale settlements but leaving behind distinctive rock art that tells us about their animals, weapons, and daily lives. The shadow of Egypt it is impossible to tell the story of Nubia without mentioning Egypt, because for much of its history, Nubia was both deeply influenced by Egypt and determined to resist Egyptian domination. When Egypt was strong, it expanded southward, sometimes annexing parts of Nubia and ruling them as colonies. When Egypt was weak, Nubia rose to power, sometimes even conquering Egypt itself. Yet the relationship was not simply one of conquest and submission. There was also cultural borrowing and blending. The Nubians adopted Egyptian gods, built temples in Egyptian style, and even used hieroglyphs. At the same time, they preserved their own traditions, creating a hybrid identity that was neither Egyptian nor wholly African, but uniquely Nubian. The rise of Kerma, the first Nubian kingdom, the first great Nubian state to emerge, was the kingdom of Kerma. Around 2500 BCE, centered near the third cataract of the Nile, Kerma grew wealthy from controlling trade routes between Egypt and the African interior. Excavations at Kerma reveal massive mud brick structures, including the famous Western Defufa, a huge temple that still stands today. Burial mounds at Kerma contain vast treasures, gold, jewelry, pottery, and even human sacrifices, showing that Kerma's kings commanded both wealth and power. Kerma was strong enough to challenge Egypt directly. During Egypt's Middle Kingdom, pharaohs struggled to maintain control over Nubia, and at times, Kerma's armies threatened Egypt's southern borders. When Egypt weakened during its second intermediate period, Kerma reached the height of its power, even allying with Egypt's enemies, the Hyksos. For a time, it seemed possible that Nubia might dominate Egypt entirely. But the rise of Egypt's new kingdom, under powerful rulers like Thutmose I and Thutmose III, changed everything. The Egyptians struck south, crushing Kerma and annexing Nubia deep into their empire. Life along the Nile beyond kings and battles. What was life like for ordinary Nubians? Archaeological finds suggest a people deeply tied to the rhythms of the Nile. They grew wheat, barley, dates, and lentils, much like the Egyptians. They raised cattle, sheep, and goats, with cattle in particular playing a symbolic role in status and wealth. Fishing, hunting, and gathering supplemented their diet. Nubian homes were typically made of mud brick, with rounded corners and flat roofs, unlike Egypt's sprawling stone temples. Nubia's early architecture reflected practicality and adaptation to the environment. Still, their artistry shone through in their pottery, jewelry, and textiles. Nubian women were especially renowned in ancient texts for their beauty and influence, and many appear to have held significant roles in society. Beliefs and burials. Religion in Nubia, as in Egypt, centered on the natural world and the forces that sustained life. The sun, the Nile, and fertility were constant themes. Over time, Egyptian gods like Amen and Isis became popular in Nubia, but older local deities also endured. At Kerma, evidence suggests worship of gods linked to cattle and fertility. Burial practices reveal much about Nubian beliefs. Kings and elites were buried in large mounds, surrounded by retainers, sacrifices, and treasures. Ordinary people also placed grave goods with the dead, suggesting a belief in an afterlife. As Egyptian influence spread, Nubian burials began to show similarities with Egyptian ones, including the use of coffins, amulets, and even pyramids, though Nubian pyramids were smaller and steeper, a style distinct from the Egyptians. The seeds of Kush, though, Kerma, fell to the Egyptians around 1500 BCE. Its legacy lived on. The people of Nubia absorbed Egyptian rule for centuries, but they did not vanish. In time, they would rise again as the Kingdom of Kush, based further south at Napata, and later at Meru. From there, Nubian kings would one day conquer Egypt itself and rule as pharaohs, but that is a story for later chapters. For now, it is enough to recognize that Nubia was never just a shadow of Egypt. It was a land of innovation, resilience, and strength, shaped by its geography, enriched by its resources, and destined to play a pivotal role in the history of Africa and the ancient world. Chapter 2. The Rise of Kerma, a golden age in Nubia as Egypt's old kingdom reached its height with the building of the Great Pyramids. Another powerful society was quietly growing to the south, beyond the Nile's second cataract. This was the Kingdom of Kerma, one of the earliest and most sophisticated African civilizations outside of Egypt. It was a kingdom that would rise from modest beginnings to rival the might of the pharaohs themselves. Its golden age laid the foundation for what would later become the Kingdom of Kush, and it set the stage for centuries of cultural and political rivalry with Egypt. The birth of a kingdom, Kerma, emerged around 2500 BCE, during a time when Egypt was experiencing its old kingdom glory. Located near the third cataract of the Nile, Kerma had the advantage of geography. The cataracts, those treacherous stretches of river filled with rocks and rapids, acted like natural fortresses, protecting Nubia from easy Egyptian invasion, while also controlling access to vital trade routes. At Kerma, people built not only villages, but a central city that became the nucleus of a powerful state. Archaeologists have uncovered evidence of urban planning, workshops, ceremonial structures, and large-scale agriculture. It was not simply a tribal community. It was a kingdom, complete with rulers, elites, soldiers, and a working class, the Western Defufa, a monument to faith and power. The heart of Kerma was its remarkable religious and ceremonial architecture. The most famous of these is the Western Defufa, a massive mud brick temple that still towers over the landscape today. Standing nearly 60 feet high, it was constructed with thick mud brick walls, stairways, and multiple levels. Inside were chapels, paintings, and sacred spaces used for rituals. The Defufa is unique in the ancient world. While Egypt built its temples from stone, Nubians relied on mud brick, but they elevated this humble material into monumental structures that have survived for millennia. To the Nubians, the Defufa symbolized not only the favor of their gods, but also the strength of their kings. Nearby, archaeologists have uncovered smaller temples, storage buildings, and even bakeries and breweries, suggesting that the city was both a spiritual and economic hub. The Defufa was not just a place of worship. It was a statement of Kerma's independence and sophistication, trade, and wealth. Nubia's golden resources, what fueled Kerma's rise? The answer is simple: wealth. Nubia was rich in natural resources that Egypt desperately craved. Gold shimmered in Nubian mines, ivory was carved from elephant tusks, and ebony wood was cut from dense African forests. Exotic animals, leopard skins, incense, and ostrich feathers were also brought north from the African interior. Kerma became a gatekeeper of this wealth. Caravans and river expeditions passed through Nubia on their way to Egypt, and Kerma's rulers profited from taxing and controlling this trade. Over time, Kerma itself became a producer and exporter, sending gold and other riches northward, while importing Egyptian goods like fine linen, wine, oils, and pottery. This constant flow of goods gave Kerma the resources to support a powerful, elite class and a large standing army. The kingdom's rulers grew wealthy and displayed their prosperity through magnificent burials, filled with treasures. Burials of kings, splendor, and sacrifice. Perhaps the most striking evidence of Kerma's power comes from its royal cemeteries. Just outside the city, massive burial mounds, some over 300 feet across, have been excavated. Inside these mounds, archaeologists discovered vast treasures: gold jewelry, ornate pottery, imported Egyptian artifacts, and even entire herds of cattle buried alongside their rulers. Yet the most shocking discoveries were the human sacrifices. Dozens, sometimes hundreds, of men and women were buried around the king, likely retainers or captives meant to serve him in the afterlife. Some were laid out in rows, while others were positioned as if asleep beside their ruler. This practice reveals not only the power of the Kerma kings, but also the deep spiritual beliefs of the Nubians, that the afterlife was a continuation of earthly life, and the king would need his court, servants, and wealth to continue ruling beyond death. The army of Kerma warriors of the Baukermas kings did not rely on wealth alone to secure their power. They commanded a formidable military, especially renowned for its archers. Egyptian texts often describe Nubian archers as some of the fiercest warriors in the world. Armed with powerful longbows, they could strike enemies at great distances, giving them an advantage in battle. The Kerma army also used chariots, infantry, and possibly war elephants from deeper in Africa. With this force, they not only defended their lands from Egyptian incursions, but also launched their own campaigns into neighboring territories. To Egypt, Kerma was both a valuable trade partner and a constant military threat. Kerma and Egypt, rivals on the Nile from its earliest days. Kerma's destiny was tied to Egypt. The two civilizations traded extensively, but they also clashed frequently. Egyptian pharaohs coveted Nubian gold and sought to control the trade routes, while Kerma's rulers resisted domination and sought independence. During Egypt's Middle Kingdom, around 2052-1710 BCE, Egyptian armies repeatedly campaigned into Nubia, building fortresses to secure trade routes and keep Kerma in check. Yet Kerma remained resilient, and when Egypt weakened during the Second Intermediate Period, Kerma seized its chance. Kerma's rulers allied with the Hyksos, foreign invaders who had taken control of northern Egypt. Together, they pressed the Egyptians from both north and south. At its peak, Kerma's influence stretched far into southern Egypt, and for a time, it seemed as if Nubia might replace Egypt as the dominant power of the Nile Valley. The Golden Age of Kermatha, centuries between 1700 and 1550 BCE, represent the Golden Age of Kerma. Its rulers commanded wealth, armies, and prestige to rival Egypt. Massive temples, palaces, and tombs were built in and around the city. Trade expanded deep into Africa, with Kerma acting as the central hub. Egyptian artifacts found in Kerma, tombs alongside unique Nubian creations, suggest that this was a cosmopolitan society, blending influences but retaining a strong Nubian identity. For ordinary people, life in Kerma was shaped by agriculture and trade. They farmed the Nile's banks, herded cattle, and worked as artisans. Skilled potters produced distinctive wares decorated with red and black surfaces that remain admired to this day. Jewelers crafted gold ornaments, while weavers made fine textiles. This was a society both practical and artistic, wealthy yet deeply spiritual. Religion and rituals. Kerma's religion remains mysterious, but archaeological evidence points to a complex system of gods and rituals. Cattle seem to have been especially sacred, appearing in both art and burials. Temples like the Western Defufa may have been dedicated to fertility gods or deities linked to the sun and Nile. The presence of human sacrifices in royal burials suggests that Kerma's religion demanded ultimate loyalty to the king, who may have been viewed as semi-divine. It also reflects a worldview in which life and death were deeply intertwined, and the community's fate was tied to the prosperity of its rulers. The fall of Kerma. But even the greatest kingdoms rise and fall. Around 1550 BCE, Egypt entered its New Kingdom era under powerful pharaohs such as Amos, Thutmose I and Thutmose III, determined to secure their southern frontier. They launched devastating campaigns into Nubia. Kerma was besieged, its armies defeated, and its lands annexed into the Egyptian Empire. For the next several centuries, Nubia would be ruled directly by Egyptian governors. Temples to Egyptian gods were built, hieroglyphs spread, and Egyptian culture dominated. Kerma, as an independent kingdom, was gone, but its spirit lived on. Nubians absorbed Egyptian influence while preserving their own traditions. Quietly waiting for the day they would rise again as the kingdom of Kush. Kerma's legacy, though, Kerma eventually fell. Its legacy cannot be overstated. It was the first great Nubian kingdom, a state that demonstrated the wealth, power, and cultural sophistication of Africa beyond Egypt. Its monumental Defufa temple, its lavish burials, and its fierce warriors all testify to a civilization equal to its northern neighbor. Later Nubian kingdoms, especially Kush, would draw upon Kerma's foundations. They inherited its warrior spirit, its control of trade, and its determination to remain distinct from Egypt even while borrowing aspects of Egyptian culture. In many ways, Kerma was the seed from which all later Nubian greatness grew. Chapter 3. Nubia under Egyptian rule, conquest, and resistance. The story of Nubia is inseparable from the story of Egypt. While the kingdom of Kerma had once rivaled Egypt in wealth and power, the balance of power shifted dramatically with the dawn of the new kingdom of Egypt around 1550 BCE. Determined pharaohs pushed their borders further south than ever before, bringing Nubia under Egyptian rule. But conquest was never just about land, it was about identity, culture, and power. For nearly 500 years, Nubia lived in the shadow of Egypt, sometimes resisting, sometimes adapting, and always maintaining a unique spirit that would eventually rise again. The Egyptian conquest of Kerma, when the Egyptian pharaohs of the 18th dynasty consolidated their rule, they turned their eyes southward. Pharaohs like Amos I and Thutmose I led campaigns deep into Nubia, determined to secure its gold mines and eliminate the threat of Kerma. The Egyptian armies were formidable. Chariots raced across battlefields, infantry advanced in tight formations, and their archers, though less feared than the Nubians, were disciplined and deadly. After years of struggle, Kerma's capital fell. Its fortresses were dismantled, its rulers dethroned, and its lands absorbed into the Egyptian empire to secure their new possession. The Egyptians built fortresses along the Nile, stationed garrisons of soldiers, and installed governors known as viceroys of Kush. These viceroys answered directly to the pharaoh and managed everything from tax collection to temple construction. Egyptian rule and control Egypt did not treat Nubia as an equal partner. Instead, Nubia became a province, a source of wealth and manpower for the Egyptian empire. Gold mines. Nubia's gold was Egypt's lifeblood. Pharaohs used it to fund temples, reward officials, and maintain their empire's grandeur. Mining operations expanded under Egyptian oversight, with Nubians often forced into labor. Trade routes. The Egyptians now controlled the flow of African goods northward. Exotic animals, ivory, incense, and leopard skins were brought through Nubia and presented as tribute to the pharaoh. Military recruitment. Nubian archers, once Egypt's enemies, were now enlisted into the Egyptian army. Valued for their skill, they became an elite corps, serving in campaigns as far away as the Levant. Egypt turned Nubia into both a resource base and a buffer zone against threats from deeper Africa. Temples and Egypticization was not only about politics and economics, it was also about culture. The Egyptians sought to integrate Nubia into their worldview by spreading their religion and language. Majestic Egyptian temples rose along the Nile in Nubia. At sites like Soleb, Amara, and Napata, temples were built to honor Egyptian gods, such as Amun-Ra, Osiris, and Isis. These temples were not just places of worship. They were symbols of Egyptian dominance. Their walls were carved with hieroglyphs glorifying the pharaoh and depicting Nubians as loyal subjects, bringing tribute. Over time, Nubian elites adopted Egyptian customs. They began writing in hieroglyphs, dressing in Egyptian-style linen, and even being buried in Egyptian-style tombs. Yet beneath this surface adaptation, Nubians continued to honor their own traditions. In art, language, and ritual, traces of their identity endured. Life under Egyptian rule. For ordinary Nubians, life changed in profound ways. Farmers still cultivated the Nile's fertile floodplains. Herders still raised cattle, and artisans still crafted pottery. But their economic lives were increasingly tied to Egyptian demands. Taxation was heavy, and much of Nubia's wealth flowed north. Egyptian officials oversaw harvests and mining operations, ensuring tribute was paid to Thebes. Villages grew around Egyptian garrisons, blending the cultures. Some Nubians prospered by cooperating with Egyptian officials, while others suffered under the burden of forced labor and cultural suppression. Yet, in this blending, a unique Nubian-Egyptian identity began to form. Over generations, Nubians learned Egyptian religion and language, but they infused these with their own traditions. This fusion would become important centuries later, when Nubia rose again. Resistance and rebellion. Egyptian rule was never uncontested. Across the centuries, rebellions flared. Archaeological evidence and Egyptian records speak of uprisings that required brutal suppression. Nubians resisted not only with arms, but also with spirit. Their traditional gods continued to be worshipped, alongside Egyptian deities. Local art retained Nubian motifs in their burial customs, even when adopting Egyptian-style tombs. Nubians often added cattle imagery or pottery, reflecting their heritage. This quiet resistance ensured that Nubian identity was not erased. Egypt may have ruled Nubia politically, but spiritually and culturally, Nubia endured. The Egyptian view of Nubia to the Egyptians. Nubia was a land of contradictions, both a prize and a threat. Pharaohs celebrated their conquests of Nubia in grand inscriptions, portraying themselves smiting dark-skinned enemies. Yet in the same breath, they praised Nubia's gold and archers. Acknowledging their indispensability, Egyptian art often depicted Nubians carrying tribute, ivory tusks, exotic animals, and gold rings. But these images tell only one side of the story. They show how Egypt wanted Nubia to be remembered not as an equal, but as a conquered land. The truth, however, was far more complex. Nubia absorbed Egyptian influence, yes, but Nubia also gave much to Egypt: wealth, soldiers, and a cultural richness that Egyptians could not ignore. The decline of Egyptian power. Egypt's grip on Nubia lasted for centuries, but no empire lasts forever. By around 1070 BCE, Egypt entered a period of decline known as the Third Intermediate Period. Internal struggles, invasions, and economic troubles weakened the pharaoh's authority. Egyptian garrisons were withdrawn from Nubia, and temples fell into disrepair. For the first time in generations, Nubia was free from direct Egyptian rule. Out of this power vacuum, a new Nubian kingdom began to emerge, centered around Napata. It would not only revive Nubian independence, but eventually reverse the balance of power, turning Nubia into Egypt's conqueror. The seeds of Kush. The centuries of Egyptian domination left a permanent mark on Nubia. Egyptian gods were worshipped alongside Nubian deities. Egyptian hieroglyphs were used, but adapted into unique forms. Nubians buried their kings in pyramids and Egyptian tradition, but with distinctly Nubian styles. This fusion of cultures became the foundation of the kingdom of Kush. When Nubians rose again, they would present themselves not as imitators of Egypt, but as rightful inheritors of its legacy. They claimed the gods favored them more than the Egyptians themselves. This belief would propel Nubian kings to extraordinary heights. A Kingdom in Waiting. Chapter 3 closes with Nubia at a crossroads. For centuries, Egypt had ruled with iron and gold, but Nubia had survived. It had absorbed Egyptian culture without losing its soul. It had suffered under tribute, but learned the machinery of empire. Now, with Egypt weakened, Nubia prepared to take its place on history's stage. The story of Kush was about to begin, a story in which Nubia would not only reclaim independence but, for a time, rule the land of the Pharaohs itself. Chapter 4. The Birth of Kush, from Napata to greatness. When Egyptian power faded and its armies retreated north, Nubia stood at a turning point. For nearly 5 centuries, it had lived under Egyptian rule, absorbing its language, religion, and customs. Yet Nubia had also preserved its own traditions, refusing to lose its identity. Out of this mixture of Egyptian influence and Nubian resilience, a new kingdom was born, the Kingdom of Kush, from its capital at Napata. This Nubian kingdom rose not merely as a survivor of Egypt's empire, but as a civilization destined to reveland, even conquered Egypt itself. The founding of Napata's Egyptian control weakened after 1100 BCE. Nubians reorganized their political life. Power centered around Napata, near the sacred mountain, Jebel Barkal. Egyptians had long considered this site holy, believing it to be the home of the god Amen. Temples to Amen already stood there, built by Egyptian pharaohs. Now, the Nubians claimed this sacred ground as their own. Napata was more than a city. It was a spiritual and political capital. Its temples connected Kushite kings to the powerful cult of Amen, giving their rule divine legitimacy by linking themselves to Egypt's most revered god. The kings of Kush presented themselves not as outsiders, but as rightful heirs to Egyptian traditions. The spirit of continuity, though Egypt had withdrawn, its presence lingered in Nubia. The new Kushite rulers adopted Egyptian hieroglyphs, built temples in Egyptian style, and even buried themselves in pyramids. Yet these pyramids were smaller and steeper than those of Egypt, marking a distinctly Nubian adaptation. Kush was not simply copying Egypt, it was reshaping Egyptian traditions into something new. The kingdom became a bridge between 2 worlds, African and Egyptian, Nubian and Pharaonic. This fusion gave Kush a unique identity, one that would set it apart from both Egypt and its other neighbors. Kings and priests sat Napata. The rulers of Kush drew much of their power from religion. The priests of Amen were central to political life. A king was not merely a warrior or administrator, he was a sacred figure, chosen by the god Amen himself. At Jebel Barkal, rituals were performed to confirm this divine appointment, linking each ruler to a cosmic order that stretched back to the days of the pharaohs. This close bond between kingship and religion strengthened Kush, where Egypt was fragmenting into competing dynasties. Kush projected unity. The people of Nubia looked to their king not only as a political leader, but also as a divine protector. The growth of power in the centuries following Egypt's retreat, Kush expanded its influence. From Napata, its rulers extended control northward to the borders of Egypt and southward into Central Africa. Trade flourished. Kush controlled routes that brought ivory, ebony, gold, and exotic animals from inner Africa to the Mediterranean. World agriculture thrived. The Nile's fertile banks provided wheat, barley, and sorghum, while cattle remained a symbol of wealth and prestige. Craftsmanship excelled. Kushite artisans produced fine pottery, jewelry, and bronze tools. Blending Egyptian techniques with African styles. Kush was no longer a subdued province. It was an independent, prosperous kingdom, with resources and stability Egypt could only envy. During its age of decline, Kush looks northward for generations. The Kushite kings strengthened their hold over Nubia, but their gaze was always fixed northward toward Egypt. Egypt, once the master of Nubia, was now weakened by internal strife and foreign invasions. By the 8th century BCE, Egypt was divided into small kingdoms, each ruled by local warlords or rival dynasties. To the Kushites, this presented both opportunity and destiny. If Egypt was in chaos, why should Kush not step in to restore order? And if the gods had abandoned Egypt's pharaohs, perhaps they now favored Kushite kings instead. The 25th dynasty begins this vision became reality under the great Kushite king Pi, also called Pianki. Around 747 BCE, Pi marched north with his army, crossing into Egypt. He proclaimed himself not a foreign invader, but the true restorer of the Egyptian concept of order and justice. In a series of campaigns, Pi defeated rival Egyptian rulers and took control of Upper Egypt, then Lower Egypt, uniting the Nile Valley under Kushite rule. This marked the beginning of Egypt's 25th dynasty, also known as the Kushite dynasty. For nearly a century, Nubian pharaohs ruled over Egypt, from the delta in the north to the cataracts of Nubia in the south. It was one of history's great reversals. The land once conquered had become the conqueror, a fusion of cultures. The Kushite pharaohs, Egypt experienced a cultural renaissance. These rulers revered Egypt's ancient traditions, seeing themselves as protectors of its heritage. They rebuilt temples, restored monuments, and revived the worship of Amen with great devotion. At the same time, they infused Egyptian culture with Nubian elements. Royal art from this period shows pharaohs with distinctly Nubian features, broad noses, full lips, and curly hair proudly displayed. Their tombs combined Egyptian hieroglyphs with Nubian symbols. Their pyramids, built at sites like El Karu and Nuri, stood as testaments to their blended heritage. This was not Egypt imposing its will on Nubia, but Nubia reshaping Egypt in its own image. The reach of Kushite power. The Kushite dynasty extended its influence far beyond the Nile Valley. Through diplomacy and military campaigns, it interacted with powers like Assyria, the rising empire of the Near East. For a time, Kushite pharaohs presented themselves as global rulers, heirs to both African and Egyptian legacies. But Assyria was a formidable rival. In the 7th century BCE, conflicts erupted between the two powers. Ultimately, the Assyrians expelled the Kushites from Egypt. Yet even after losing control of the Nile Delta, Kush remained strong in its homeland, retreating to Napata, and later establishing a new capital at Meru. Napata, as a cultural beacon though the Kushites lost Egypt, Napata retained its sacred importance. Temples at Jebel Barkal continued to host ceremonies linking kings to the god Amen. The pyramids of Napata rose against the desert sky, creating a landscape of power and reverence. Kush did not fade after its withdrawal from Egypt. Instead, it turned inward, developing new traditions, strengthening its economy, and preparing for another chapter of greatness. The legacy of Napatan period established the foundation of the Kushite kingdom's enduring identity. It blended Egyptian religious authority with Nubian resilience, creating a culture both familiar and unique. From Napata, Kush demonstrated that Nubia was no longer a land defined by Egypt's shadow, but a force in its own right. When Egypt faltered, Kush rose. When Egypt lost its power, Kush claimed it. This pattern of resilience and adaptation defined the Nubian spirit, one that would continue into the next phase of their history centered at Meru, a city that would shine as the jewel of Africa for centuries. Chapter 4 reveals not just a political transformation, but a cultural rebirth. From the ashes of Egyptian domination, Kush rose as an independent kingdom, proud of its Nubian roots and confident enough to claim the legacy of Egypt itself. Napata was its heart, a city where politics, religion, and identity merged into a vision of greatness. And yet, the story of Kush was only beginning. Ahead lay the golden age of Meru, where iron trade and innovation would propel Nubia into a new era of prosperity and global connection. Chapter 5. Meru, the jewel of Nubia. As the sun set over Napata, and the age of the Kushite pharaohs came to an end. A new chapter in Nubia's story began. The kingdom of Kush, far from collapsing, simply shifted its center of power around the 6th century BCE. The capital moved southward to a city that would shine for nearly 1,000 years, Meru, nestled between the Nile and the rolling savannas of Africa. Meru became the beating heart of Nubia, place of innovation, wealth, and resilience. While other empires rose and fell, Meru endured, building a civilization unlike any other in the ancient world. Why Meru? The choice of a capital, the relocation of Kush's capital from Napata to Meru, was no accident. Several practical and symbolic reasons made Meru the ideal choice. Geography? Meru lay further south than Napata, safely out of reach of constant Egyptian or Assyrian interference. Its location offered protection against northern invasions. Resources. The region around Meru was rich in iron ore, hardwood, forests for charcoal, and fertile land along the Nile. These resources would allow Meru to become an industrial powerhouse. Trade routes. Positioned at a crossroads, Meru connected the Mediterranean world to Central and Eastern Africa. Caravans carrying ivory, gold, incense, and exotic animals passed through its gates. By settling here, the kings of Kush ensured not only survival, but also prosperity. What began as a strategic move evolved into the golden age of Nubian civilization. The rise of an iron empire. One of the most remarkable features of Meru was its mastery of iron production. Long before many other regions embraced iron technology, Meru had already built massive furnaces, where ore was smelted and forged into tools, weapons, and agricultural instruments. The city became a forest of smokestacks, earning it the nickname the Birmingham of Africa. Archaeologists have uncovered mounds of slag waste from iron production that testify to centuries of intense industry. Iron transformed life in Kush. Farmers cleared and cultivated more land with durable iron tools. Warriors wielded stronger weapons, giving Meru's armies a distinct advantage. Traders carried Kushite iron goods far beyond the Nile Valley. Spreading its influence, Meru's iron industry was not just economic, it was symbolic of the kingdom's resilience, a clear sign that it had moved beyond Egyptian imitation and into a new age of innovation. A city of splendor. Descriptions of Meru evoke a city of striking beauty and grandeur. Imagine rows of palaces decorated with carved reliefs, bustling marketplaces filled with traders from Arabia, India, and the Mediterranean, and sacred temples where incense rose to the skies. The pyramids of Meru, though smaller than those of Giza, dotted the desert landscape in the hundreds. Built with steep sides and crowned with small chapels, they reflected a distinctly Nubian style. Each pyramid held the remains of kings, queens, and nobles, surrounded by treasures for the afterlife. Unlike Egypt, however, women often held extraordinary power here. The Kandakes, or Nubian queens, sometimes ruled as sovereigns in their own right. They commanded armies, negotiated with foreign powers, and were remembered for their fierce independence. Queens like Amenarina's would one day stand toe-to-toe with Rome itself. Religion in Meru. Spiritual life of Meru blended old traditions with new developments. The worship of Amen remained central, but other deities rose to prominence, such as Apidmok, the lion-headed god of war, who symbolized Nubia's strength and independence. Temples dedicated to Apidmok and other local gods show that Meru was moving away from strict Egyptian influence and embracing a uniquely African religious identity. Carvings depict Apidmok towering above kings, blessing them with victory and power. This religious evolution reflected Kush's confidence. It no longer needed Egypt's gods to legitimize its rule. The kingdom could honor its own pantheon, rooted in the land and spirit of Africa. The written word. Another sign of Meru's independence was the creation of its own writing system, the Meroitic script. While Napatan kings had relied on Egyptian hieroglyphs, The rulers of Meru developed a script of their own around the 2nd century BCE, Meroitic writing, used for both religious texts and administrative purposes, remains only partly understood. Today, its existence proves that Kush had developed a literate and bureaucratic culture that no longer needed to lean on Egyptian models. This script was more than letters on stone. It was a declaration of cultural identity. The people of Meru were saying, "We are not merely imitators, we are creators." Meru and the outside world. Meru's influence extended far beyond Nubia. Its merchants and envoys traveled across deserts and seas. To the north, they dealt with Egypt, which was now often under Greek or Roman rule. To the east, they traded across the Red Sea with Arabia and India, bringing spices, textiles, and incense. To the south, they connected with African kingdoms deep in the interior, exchanging goods like ivory, ostrich feathers, and exotic animals. Meru stood at the crossroads of continents, both African and Mediterranean, both ancient and emerging. Its wealth was not hidden, but broadcast through trade, diplomacy, and cultural exchange. Conflict with Rome. The might of Meru was tested in the 1st century BCE, when Rome conquered Egypt. The Roman legions, disciplined and ruthless, pushed southward, but the Kushites were not passive subjects. Under the leadership of the Candake Monarinas, Meru resisted Roman expansion. In one legendary episode, Kushite forces raided Roman Egypt, capturing statues of Augustus Caesar and burying them beneath temple steps, forcing worshippers to tread upon the Roman emperor's image. Rome eventually negotiated peace, and remarkably, Meru emerged with favorable terms. Unlike many kingdoms crushed by Rome, Meru maintained its independence. This defiance against the greatest empire of the time speaks to Kush's enduring strength and pride. Daily life in Meru. While kings and queens built monuments and led armies, the people of Meru carried on daily lives shaped by the rhythms of the Nile. Farmers grew sorghum, barley, and wheat, irrigating their fields with canals. Cattle herders grazed livestock in the savannas, their wealth measured in herds. Craftsmen worked as potters, jewelers, and ironworkers. Their pottery, decorated with red and black designs, is still admired for its elegance. Children likely grew up learning family trades, while priests and scribes maintained the spiritual and administrative heartbeat of the city. Meru was not just a kingdom of kings, but a society of thousands, each contributing to its legacy. The slow decline for centuries, Meru flourished, but like all empires, it eventually faced decline. Environmental pressures, such as deforestation from iron smelting and soil exhaustion from overfarming, weakened the land. Trade routes shifted as new powers rose along the Red Sea, reducing Meru's economic dominance. By the 4th century CE, the rising kingdom of Aksum in Ethiopia dealt the final blow. Around 350 CE, Aksumite armies conquered Meru, bringing an end to Kush's long reign. Yet even in its fall, Meru's legacy endured. Its pyramids still stand in the desert, silent witnesses to 1,000 years of history. The legacy of Meru represents the height of Nubian achievement. It was a city of iron and pyramids, of queens and gods, of trade and culture. Unlike Napata, which looked north to Egypt, Meru looked in all directions, connecting Africa to the wider world. Its people forged an identity that was proudly Nubian, rooted in African soil, yet open to the world beyond the Nile. In many ways, Meru was the bridge between Africa's past and future, a civilization that defied empires and wrote its own story. Closing. Reflections Chapter 5 reminds us that history is not only about conquest and loss, it is also about endurance and creativity. While Egypt often steals the spotlight, Meru stands as proof that Nubia carved its own path. Its pyramids may not be as famous as those at Giza, but they carry the spirit of a people who thrived for centuries on their own terms. As we leave Meru behind, we carry forward the image of a city of smoke and stone, of iron and gold, of kings and queens whose names still echo in the winds of the desert. Chapter 6. Queens of Kush, the power of the Kandakes. When we think of ancient civilizations, kings usually dominate the stage. Pharaohs, emperors, and warlords often fill the pages of history. But in the kingdom of Kush, something remarkable set it apart. Women ruled as sovereigns, warriors, and guardians of the throne. These queens were known as the Kandakes, sometimes spelled Candace, and their legacy reveals a society where female power was not hidden, but celebrated. Chapter 6 shines a light on these extraordinary rulers, women who stood against foreign empires and carved their names into stone, commanding respect across the ancient world. The meaning of Kandake, the title Kandake, was more than a royal Nemet, was a sacred office. Just as Egypt had Pharaoh, Kush had Kandake, which signified the mother of the king, the queen regnant, or both. In many cases, the Kandake ruled as a co-sovereign, alongside the king, or, in some instances, as the sole ruler. This unique institution gave women direct political, military, and religious authority. Unlike in many societies where queens were secondary, in Kush they stood as equals, or even superiors. They could inherit power, command armies, oversee diplomacy, and perform rituals at the temples of the gods. Why women rose to power in Kush? The prominence of women in Kushite politics may have several roots. Religion. In Nubian belief systems, queens often embodied divine authority, closely tied to fertility, renewal, and the spiritual world. Their role in temple rituals gave them sacred legitimacy. Matriarchy and succession. Some historians argue that succession may have passed through the maternal line, making queens the carriers of royal blood. Military necessity. In times of crisis, Kandakes emerged as leaders who could rally the nation when kings were absent or kingdoms threatened. Whatever the origin, the Kandakes became a hallmark of Nubian power and a contrast to many neighboring kingdoms. Queen Amenarenas, the lioness against Rome. Perhaps the most famous Kandake was Amenarenas, who ruled in the late 1st century BCE. Her reign is remembered for a bold confrontation with none other than the Roman Empire. After Rome annexed Egypt in 30 BCE, it attempted to extend its control southward into Nubia, but Amenarenas would not allow her kingdom to be swallowed by Rome's expanding shadow. Leading her armies herself, she attacked Roman garrisons in southern Egypt. The Kandakes' forces raided deep into enemy territory, famously capturing statues of Augustus Caesar. In a symbolic act of defiance, these statues were buried beneath the steps of temples, so that every worshipper would tread on the face of Rome's emperor. When Rome retaliated, Amenarenas fought fiercely. Despite Rome's superior legions, she managed to negotiate peace on favorable terms. Her victory was not just military, it was psychological. She proved that even the world's greatest empire could be challenged by a queen of Kush. Her story became legend, a woman on the battlefield, adorned in royal regalia, guiding her warriors like a lioness defending her cubs. Queen Amani, builder and patronator. Kandake Amani Shaheto ruled in the 1st century CE and left behind a legacy of wealth and artistry. She built temples and pyramids at Meru, adorning them with reliefs of herself alongside the gods. She commissioned jewelry of stunning craftsmanship, much of which has been uncovered by archaeologists. Amanishaketo's treasures reveal not only her personal wealth, but also the prosperity of Meru during her reign. She projected strength not through war alone, but through culture, building monuments that would stand for millennia. Other Kandakes in history. The list of Kandakes stretches across centuries. Shanaktakhet, 2nd century BCE, considered one of the earliest known ruling queens of Kush, who appears on inscriptions as a sovereign in her own right. Amanator, 1st century CE, who co-ruled with a king and left a significant mark through temple construction. Amonikatash, 2nd century CE, remembered for expanding trade and religious patronage. Each queen left her imprint on Nubian history, whether through war, diplomacy, or monumental building. How the world saw them to outsiders, the Kandaks were both admired and feared. Roman writers described them as powerful and intimidating. Greek historians recorded their unusual role in governance, often in awe that women could wield such authority. One Roman source even claimed that Alexander the Great turned away from invading Nubia after hearing of a powerful Kandak ruling the land. Whether true or not, the story reflects the respect these queens commanded. They were symbols of resistance, dignity, and power in a male-dominated world. The Kandak in art and symbolism, reliefs, and temple carvings. Kandaks appear larger than life. They are shown smiting enemies, standing tall before the gods, or sitting on thrones as equals to kings. Their crowns were adorned with ram horns, sun discs, and feathers, symbols of divine authority. Some depictions emphasize their physical strength, broad shoulders, commanding presence, and determined expressions. These images were not meant to flatter but to project real power. To their subjects, the Kandaks were not just women, they were embodiments of the kingdom itself, a society that empowered women. What made Kush so different from many ancient civilizations was its acceptance of women as leaders. Far from being anomalies, Kandaks were part of a long tradition. Women could own property, manage estates, and inherit authority. This empowerment shaped the culture of Kush. It demonstrated that strength came not only from kings and warriors, but also from queens who could rule with wisdom, courage, and determination. Daily life for the Kandakathau surrounded by wealth. The life of a Kandakat was filled with responsibilities. She presided over ceremonies, made judgments in disputes, directed the building of temples, and received foreign envoys. When threats arose, she donned armor and led troops. When peace prevailed, she fostered trade and culture. The Kandak was not a figurehead, she was the spine of the kingdom, balancing power between the throne, the priesthood, and the people. The enduring legacy of the Kandakasavan after the fall of Meru in the 4th century CE. The stories of the Kandak survived. Their pyramids still rise in the desert, bearing inscriptions that testify to their rule. Their names appear in classical records, a reminder that Nubia was a land where women's power was not suppressed, but celebrated. In today's world, their legacy inspires admiration. They stand as proof that female leadership is not a modern invention, but an ancient tradition, deeply rooted in African history. Chapter 6 reveals a story rarely told in world history. The story of women who ruled with the authority of kings, who defended their land against empires, and who left behind monuments of stone and legend. The Kandaks remind us that history is richer, more complex, and more diverse than the usual tales of male conquerors. In the soft echoes of the desert wind, one can almost hear their voices still commanding, guiding, and refusing to be forgotten. Chapter 7 Trade, Wealth, and the Lifeblood of the Nile. If the Kandaks were the heart of Kush, then trade was its lifeblood. Ancient Nubia and Kush thrived not only because of kings and queens, pyramids and temples, or armies and conquests, but also because of the river that sustained them, the Nile, flowing through arid deserts and vast savannas. The Nile brought life to the land. It was a highway of commerce, a link between kingdoms, and a source of wealth that made Nubia both admired and envied by its neighbors. This chapter explores how trade and economy shaped the identity of Kush. It is a story of bustling markets, camel caravans, riverboats heavy with cargo, and foreign merchants who traveled across deserts and seas to acquire the treasures of Nubia. More than gold, ivory, and ebony, it was the flow of goods and ideas that made Nubia a true crossroads of the ancient world. The geography of wealth. Kush was strategically positioned. To its north lay Egypt, one of the wealthiest and most powerful civilizations of antiquity. To its south stretched the lands of sub-Saharan Africa, rich with resources like ivory, incense, exotic animals, and precious minerals. To its east was the Red Sea, a gateway to Arabia and India. This geography made Nubia a bridge between continents. The Nile served as the artery of trade, carrying goods up and down the river. Caravans crossed deserts, bringing treasures from far-off lands. Kush became not just a kingdom, but a hub where cultures and economies converged. The gift of gold, no single resource defined Nubia more than gold. Ancient Egypt called Nubia Taseti, and later Nubia, a word believed to derive from nub, meaning gold. Mines across Nubia glittered with this precious metal, and it became both the pride and the curse of the land. From riverbeds to desert mountains, Nubian miners extracted gold dust and nuggets, which were then fashioned into jewelry, offerings, and coins. The gold of Nubia adorned Egyptian temples, decorated pharaohs, and later filled Roman treasuries. But gold was more than wealth, it was power. Control of the mines meant control of trade. For centuries, Egypt sought to dominate Nubia for this reason, and Kushite kings fiercely guarded their mines. Even today, abandoned shafts and ruined workshops bear silent witness to the golden age of Nubia. Ivory, ebony, and exotic goods beyond gold. Nubia was renowned for its other exports. Ivory, from elephant tusks, was highly prized across the ancient world. It was carved into furniture, inlays, combs, and ritual objects. Ebony wood, deep and dark, was shipped north for luxurious furniture and temple doors. Nubian traders also supplied leopard skins, ostrich feathers, and incense, items considered rare and sacred in Egypt. Exotic animals, giraffes, monkeys, and leopards were captured and sent as gifts to foreign courts. Each item was more than a commodity. It was a symbol of Nubia's connection to the wild richness of Africa. The flow of ideas trade was not only about goods. Along with gold and ivory came ideas, religions, and technologies. Merchants carried languages, stories, and rituals across borders. Egyptian gods mingled with Nubian deities, and later, influences from Greece, Rome, and even India reached Nubia through trade routes. This exchange enriched Kushite culture. Temples dedicated to Amen bore Egyptian influence, but Nubian beliefs gave the god unique local forms. Trade thus became a silent teacher, shaping how Kush saw the world and how the world saw Kush. The marketplaces of Kush. Imagine the markets of Meru, the capital of Kush. Stalls lined the streets, shaded by woven mats, filled with pottery, jewelry, woven cloth, and baskets of grain. Merchants shouted, their wares gold dust weighed on bronze scales, ivory gleaming in the sun, ostrich feathers tied in bundles. Foreigners mingled among the crowds, Egyptian traders with linen, Greek merchants with amphorae of wine, Arab caravaneers with spices and incense. Currencies shifted between barter and coinage. Smells of roasting meat and incense filled the air. The marketplace was not merely a center of commerce. It was a stage where cultures met and where Kush announced its prosperity to the world. The Red Sea connection, the eastern deserts of Nubia, held roots to the Red Sea. From ports like Berenike and Agilis, Kushite goods were shipped to Arabia, India, and beyond. Spices from India, silks from China, and pearls from the Persian Gulf passed through Nubian hands. This maritime trade expanded Kush's influence far beyond Africa. Merchants in Rome and Athens admired Nubian goods without ever setting foot in the desert kingdom. Through the Red Sea, Kush became part of a global network long before the word global even existed. Roman demand and the pressure of empire. When Rome took control of Egypt, it inherited Nubia as a neighbor. Roman appetite for luxury, ivory, and exotic animals fueled trade with Kush. But trade was not always peaceful. Tensions often flared, and wars like those led by Queen Amynarinas reminded Rome that Nubia was no passive supplier. Still, Roman coins and amphorae have been found deep in Kushite lands, proof that even rivals could not resist the pull of commerce. Trade was a force stronger than politics, binding two empires in an uneasy but profitable relationship. Agriculture, as foundation behind the glitter of gold and ivory, lay. A simpler, but equally vital farming. The Nile's floods allowed Kushites to grow wheat, barley, dates, and millet. Herds of cattle grazed on fertile pastures, and fishing supplemented the diet. Agriculture was the quiet foundation that sustained trade. Without food for its people, armies, and caravans, Kush could not have thrived. Thus, farmers and herders were as crucial to the kingdom's survival as merchants and kings. Caravan routes and desert journeys, caravans, were the veins through which Kush's wealth flowed. Long lines of donkeys, and later camels, carried heavy loads across deserts. Guided by stars, traders endured scorching days and freezing nights. Water was scarce, but oases marked lifelines along the journey. Stories of caravan leaders became part of Nubian lore, men and women who braved sandstorms and bandits to bring riches to their people. These journeys connected Kush to lands as far as Central Africa, Arabia, and the Mediterranean world. The decline of trade made Kush flourish, but it also made it vulnerable. As global trade shifted toward the Red Sea, and later toward the rising Aksumite kingdom in Ethiopia, Kush's influence waned. Caravans turned to new routes, and ships favored new ports. Slowly, the markets of Meru grew quiet. By the 4th century CE, the once bustling trade routes of Nubia had declined, signaling the twilight of the kingdom. Yet for centuries, Kush had stood as a beacon of wealth and connection, its marketplaces echoing with the sound of prosperity. Closing Reflections Chapter 7 reminds us that civilizations are not built on warriors alone, but on the flow of goods, ideas, and people. Nubia's wealth was not only in gold and ivory, but in its position as a bridge between worlds. Through trade, it linked Africa to Egypt, the Mediterranean, Arabia, and India. As we drift into sleep, imagine the gentle rocking of a boat on the Nile, its sails full of desert wind, carrying treasures downstream. Hear the voices of merchants in Meru, the clink of scales weighing gold, the hum of a marketplace alive with life. This was the heartbeat of Kush, the rhythm of trade, the lifeblood of a kingdom. Chapter 8. The spiritual world of Nubia and Kush. Gods, temples, and rituals. Civilizations are not remembered by their wealth alone, but by the stories they told about the universe, the gods they worshipped, and the rituals that guided their lives. For the people of Nubia and Kush, spirituality was the thread that bound their society together. Temples rose from the deserts, incense drifted in the air, and chants echoed against the stone walls of sanctuaries. The world of the gods was as real to them as the Pharaohs' Nile flowing through their land. It was a world of unseen powers, divine guardians, and rulers who walked a sacred path between humanity and divinity. In this chapter, we will step quietly into that spiritual world, where every stone, every prayer, and every offering carried meaning. Gods of two worlds. Nubia was unique in its pantheon of gods. Living beside Egypt, the Nubians shared many of the same deities. They revered Amun, the great creator and king of the gods, and Isis, the goddess of magic and motherhood. Yet, Nubia gave these gods its own interpretations, blending Egyptian beliefs with their native traditions. Local gods thrived alongside imported ones. One of the most beloved was Apedmak, the lion-headed god of war and protection. Unlike the falcon-headed Horus of Egypt, Apedmak was uniquely Nubian, symbolizing strength and the savannah's wild power. He was a protector of warriors and kings, embodying both ferocity and guardianship. This duality, Egyptian influence and native creation, made Nubian religion distinct. It was not simply a copy of Egypt, but a living, evolving faith that reflected the heart of its people. Temples, as bridges, To the divine in the cities of Nubia, especially Napata and Meru, temples stood as sacred centers, built of stone and adorned with carvings. They were not just places of worship, but bridges between earth and heaven. The most important temple was at Jebel Barkal, a mountain the Nubians considered holy. Rising out of the desert, its cliffs were seen as the throne of the god Amen. At its base, kings built temples where priests performed rituals, sacrifices, and coronations. To be crowned at Jebel Barkal was to receive divine approval, was where human rulers became sacred kings. Inside these temples, walls were covered with hieroglyphs, scenes of offerings, and depictions of gods. Columns held up massive roofs, and sanctuaries at the heart of each temple were hidden chambers where only priests could enter. It was there that statues of the gods resided, clothed, fed, and honored daily. The role of priests and priestesses was carefully maintained by priests and priestesses. They were the guardians of sacred knowledge, the interpreters of the god's will, and the keepers of rituals. Each day, priests bathed and purified themselves before approaching the gods. They offered bread, beer, meat, and incense. They chanted hymns, lit lamps, and recited prayers. These actions were not symbolic, but essential. To the Nubians, the universe depended on balance, and the priests kept that balance alive. Priestesses also held power, especially in cults dedicated to Isis. They played music, sang sacred songs, and guided worshippers in rituals of healing and fertility. In this way, religion was not only a male domain, but a shared calling. Rituals of life and death. The Nubians believed that life and death were part of a grand cycle. Rituals marked every stage of life: birth, initiation, marriage, and death. Offerings to the gods were woven into daily life, from small libations of water to grand sacrifices of cattle. Death, however, was a sacred passage. Like Egypt, Nubians believed in an afterlife. The body was prepared with care, buried with goods, and laid to rest in tombs or pyramids. But Nubian burials had their own flavor. Offerings included pottery, tools, and personal belongings, reflecting the individuality of the deceased. In grander burials, elaborate ceremonies honored the dead. Priests recited spells, drums echoed, and fires burned incense. Death was not an end, but a transformation, a return to the gods. The festivals of faith festivals brought communities together in joy and reverence. At certain times of the year, temples opened their doors, and statues of the gods were carried in processions. People gathered in music, dancing, and offerings, giving thanks for fertility, rain, or victory. One such festival honored Amen. His statue would be carried from Jebel Bar to other temples, visiting the people who celebrated his journey with feasting and song. These festivals reminded Nubians that the gods were not distant, but present in their lives. Oracles and the voice of the gods. At times of uncertainty, the people turned to oracles. Priests carried sacred statues on litters, and as they walked, the movements of the statue were interpreted as answers from the gods. Should a king go to war? Should a treaty be signed? Should a temple be built? The gods answered through these oracles, shaping the destiny of Kush for the people. This was proof that the divine was not silent. The gods spoke, guided, and protected them, ensuring that rulers followed sacred will. The lion god, all deities, Apedmak held a special place in Nubian hearts. Depicted as a man with a lion's head, he was both fierce and merciful. Temples dedicated to him, like those at Musawarat-e-Sufra, reveal his importance. Carvings show him blessing kings, standing with queens, and receiving offerings. Unlike the calm Egyptian gods, Apedmak radiated raw power, the untamed spirit of the land. He was the protector of Kushite identity, a symbol of strength unique to their culture. Magic and everyday life. Religion was not confined to temples. It flowed into daily life through charms, amulets, and prayers. Mothers tied protective beads around their children. Farmers asked the Nile for fertility. Hunters whispered to spirits before journeys. Magic and ritual blended with practicality. For Nubians, the spiritual world was everywhere, in the desert winds, in the waters of the Nile, in the cries of animals. Life was lived in constant conversation with the unseen. Influence from beyond. Trade brought more than goods. It brought spiritual ideas. Nubian religion absorbed Egyptian myths, Greek philosophies, and later, even whispers of Christianity. Yet, it never lost its unique character. Each foreign influence was reshaped, made Nubian, and woven into their fabric of belief. This adaptability was a strength. It allowed Kush to remain open to the world, without losing its soul. The gods of Nubia walked alongside those of Egypt and Rome, creating a spiritual tapestry unlike any other. The decline of temples. As centuries passed, the grand temples of Nubia began to fade. The rise of Christianity in the 4th century CE shifted faith away from the old gods. Temples were abandoned, statues buried, rituals forgotten, yet the ruins still stand. Jebel, Barkal, Musawarat, and Meru's silent witnesses of devotion. There, stones carry the echoes of prayers, the smell of incense, the footsteps of priests. Even in decline, the spirit of Nubian faith endured. Closing reflections. The spiritual world of Nubia and Kush was not an abstract idea, it was life itself. It guided kings and commoners, shaped laws and rituals, and filled the land with sacred meaning. In their gods, the Nubians saw reflections of themselves, powerful, resilient, and deeply connected to nature and the divine. As you drift into rest, imagine the flicker of temple lamps against stone walls, the sound of priests chanting in the darkness, and the distant echo of drums carried on the desert wind. This was the heartbeat of Nubia's spirit, a rhythm of faith that continues to whisper across time. Chapter 9. The Art and Architecture of Nubia and Kush. Pyramids, temples, and crafts. Art and architecture are windows into the soul of a civilization. They tell us how people saw the world, what they valued, and what they wished to leave behind. For Nubia and Kush, creativity was not only a matter of beauty, but of identity. Each stone laid, each carving etched, and each jewel crafted carried the story of a people proud of their culture and eager to mark their place in history. In this chapter, we will journey through the pyramids, rising from desert sands, temples, standing as bridges to the gods, and crafts that revealed the delicate hands of Nubian artisans. Their art was more than decoration, it was memory carved in stone. The pyramids of Nubia. When most people hear the word pyramid, their minds go to Egypt's Giza Plateau. Yet, in Nubia, hundreds of pyramids still stand, rising in clusters across the desert. These are not mere imitations of Egypt's monuments. They are smaller, steeper, and uniquely Nubian, telling a story of adaptation and innovation. The pyramids of Meru, in particular, form a breathtaking sight. Their sharp angles pierce the sky, their sandstone walls glowing red under the desert sun. Built as tombs for kings and queens, they symbolize not only the afterlife, but the power and endurance of Kushite royalty. Inside these pyramids, chambers were decorated with paintings and carvings, scenes of the dead receiving offerings, traveling to the afterlife, and being welcomed by the gods, adorned the walls. Even today, standing among these silent structures, one feels the weight of history and the ambition of a people determined to leave their mark. Temples, homes of the gods. Pyramids honored the dead, but the temples honored the living gods. As we saw earlier, the most sacred site was Jebel Barkal, the mountain thought to be the dwelling of Ammon. Around this holy site, massive temples were constructed, their walls inscribed with hymns and victories. Unlike Egyptian temples, Nubian temples often included imagery of their own gods, such as the lion-headed ape Tmak. At Musawa Art, Issaphra, a massive temple complex sprawled across the desert, with courtyards, halls, and sculptures. This site was more than a temple, it was a center of learning, pilgrimage, and ceremony. Walking through these ruins today, one can still imagine processions of priests, the scent of incense, and chants echoing off sandstone walls. The architecture was both spiritual and political, reminding people that their rulers were chosen by the gods, royal palaces and cities beyond temples and tombs. Nubia and Kush built thriving cities at Napata and later at Meru. Palaces rose above bustling streets. These palaces were not just royal homes, but administrative centers, where scribes recorded laws, officials managed trade, and leaders governed the kingdom. The layout of these cities showed a careful balance. Markets clustered near riverbanks, artisans worked in workshops, and religious sanctuaries stood at the heart. Streets carried the noise of daily life: merchants bargaining, children playing, and guards patrolling. The architecture reflected a society that valued order, yet remained connected to the rhythms of nature. Craftsmanship and jewelry: Nubian artisans were masters of their craft. Skilled in pottery, metalwork, and jewelry making, they produced goods admired far beyond their borders. Gold, so abundant in Nubia, became their signature. Kings and queens wore crowns, necklaces, and bracelets shimmering with gold, often inlaid with carnelian, lapis lazuli, and turquoise. Jewelry was not only decorative, but symbolic. Amulets carried protective spells. Rings bore inscriptions of power. Necklaces celebrated fertility or invoked the blessings of the gods. Even in everyday life, ordinary people wore simple beads or carved ornaments. These small details reveal a culture that celebrated beauty, not as luxury, but as a part of life itself. Pottery and daily art, while pyramids and palaces told of royalty, pottery told the story of everyday people. Nubian pottery was famous for its elegance and creativity. Painted with geometric patterns, animals, and sometimes even scenes of daily life, these vessels carried grain, beer, and water. The beauty of Nubian pottery lay in its simplicity. Even ordinary storage jars were crafted with care, smooth surfaces polished to shine. In these humble objects, we glimpse the hands of potters who worked with both skill and pride. Carvings and wall art: the walls of Nubian temples and tombs came alive with carvings and paintings. Kings were shown offering gifts to gods, queens were depicted as divine figures, and battles were etched into stone. What makes Nubian art distinct is its blending of styles. Egyptian influence is visible, but the Nubians gave their figures unique features: full lips, curly hair, and distinctive clothing. These images celebrated their identity, ensuring that their people were seen not as shadows of Egypt, but as a civilization of their own. The sound of art, music, and dance art in Nubia was not only visual, it was alive with sound, music, and dance. Played central roles in celebrations, rituals, and daily life. Harps, drums, and flutes created rhythms that echoed through temples and festivals. Dancers moved in flowing patterns, telling stories with their bodies. Songs praised kings, honored gods, and soothed the soul. These performances were as much a part of their art as carvings on stone, giving us a fuller picture of Nubian creativity. Innovation and influenced Nubian architecture, and art influenced, and were influenced by others. Their pyramids, though inspired by Egypt, became models of their own. Their pottery spread through trade. Their jewelry impressed foreign visitors. Greek and Roman writers noted the wealth of Nubian craftsmanship, praising the gold and the skill of their artisans. Even today, museums around the world display Nubian treasures, testimony to the lasting power of their art, the legacy of Nubian creativity. Though centuries have passed, the art and architecture of Nubia remain. The pyramids still rise against desert skies. The temples still hold whispers of prayers, and the jewelry still sparkles in the sands. These creations were not only monuments to power, but gifts to the future, ensuring that the memory of Nubia and Kush would never fade. As you close your eyes, imagine standing among the pyramids of Meru. The wind stirs the desert, the sun warms the stone, and silence stretches across the land. Yet, in that silence, the voices of artisans, priests, and kings still echo. Their art was their language, and it continues to speak across time. Chapter 10. The Rise of Meru Industry, Trade, and Power. When the heart of a kingdom shifts, it often marks a new beginning. For Nubia and Kush, this transformation came with the rise of Meru, a city that became the beating heart of the Kushite Empire for centuries. Situated along the Nile but closer to the vast interior of Africa, Meru blossomed into a center of power, wealth, and creativity. This chapter invites us into the bustling streets of Meru, where blacksmiths hammered iron, caravans carried goods across the desert, and rulers gazed from their palaces at a kingdom that pulsed with vitality. It was here that Kush reached a new golden age, weaving together its traditions with innovation, and creating a civilization whose echoes still linger in the ruins scattered across the Sudanese desert. The shift from Napata to Marunapata, near the sacred mountain of Jebel Barkal, had long been the spiritual and political capital of Kush. But over time, pressures both external and internal encouraged a move. Egypt's changing power, raids from outside forces, and the desire for a safer, more resource-rich location led the Kushite kings to shift their seat of power farther south. Meru offered advantages Napata could not. Its location placed it near fertile lands, reliable rainfall, and thick forests that supplied timber and fuel. The region was rich in iron ore, making it an ideal site for industry. By moving the capital, the rulers of Kush ensured that their kingdom would not only survive, but thrive. The iron capital, perhaps the most striking feature of Meru, was its mastery of ironworking. So significant was this industry that modern archaeologists have nicknamed Meru the Birmingham of Africa, comparing it to the great industrial city of England. The land around Meru provided both the iron ore and the wood needed to smelt it. Day and night, furnaces glowed, and the sound of hammering echoed across the city. Blacksmiths crafted tools that improved farming, weapons that strengthened armies, and ornaments that displayed wealth. Iron changed everything. With stronger tools, agriculture expanded, feeding larger populations. With better weapons, armies could defend borders and expand influence. With metal goods, trade networks stretched farther, bringing in luxuries and spreading Kushite power. Even centuries later, the slag heaps mountains of leftover material from smelting still surround Meru, silent witnesses to its industrious past. Trade in caravans. Meru was not only an industrial center, but also a hub of trade, positioned between sub-Saharan Africa, Egypt, and the Mediterranean. It became a crossroads of cultures and goods. Caravans of camels and donkeys streamed into the city, carrying ivory, ebony, incense, and exotic animal skins from the south. From Egypt and beyond came wine, fine linen, and precious oils. Traders filled markets with chatter, as goods exchanged hands and stories from far-off lands were told under the shade of awnings. The Nile added to Meru's wealth, serving as a natural highway. Boats carried grain, gold, and iron downstream, linking the city to Egypt and through the Mediterranean to the wider world. This network of trade did more than enrich the kingdom. It connected Meru to global cultures, bringing influences in art, religion, and ideas that blended with local traditions. Royal power and palaces. At the heart of Meru stood the royal palaces. These were not merely residences, but centers of administration, where laws were issued, scribes kept records, and envoys from foreign lands were received. The kings of Meru wielded great power, but they shared it with queens, known as kendiks. These royal women were among the most powerful female rulers of the ancient world. They commanded armies, directed trade, and were often depicted on temple walls, with strength equal to kings. From the palaces, the rulers oversaw not only the material wealth of their city but also its spiritual health. They sponsored temples, led ceremonies, and ensured that the gods of Kush were honored. Their leadership helped transform Meru into a shining jewel of Africa. Temples and spiritual life though. The capital had moved from Napata, the spiritual traditions continued. Temples dedicated to Amun, Isis, and local deities like Apedmak rose within Meru. These sacred sites linked the city to its divine heritage and provided places where citizens could gather, pray, and participate in festivals. The lion-headed god Apedmak gained particular prominence in Meru. Unlike the Egyptian Amun, Apedmak was a distinctly Kushite deity, symbolizing both war and fertility. His temples were adorned with carvings of lions and rulers receiving his blessing, reflecting the city's unique blend of tradition and innovation. City life in Meru was vibrant. Streets bustled with merchants, artisans, priests, and farmers. Workshops clanged with metalwork, markets overflowed with goods, and children played near the Nile's edge. Homes of ordinary people were built of mud brick, simple but sturdy. Families gathered around meals of grain, vegetables, and sometimes meat or fish. In wealthier quarters, houses were larger, decorated with painted walls and fine furnishings. Festivals brought the city together. Music filled the air, drums beat in rhythm, and dancers moved in celebration of gods and kings. These moments of joy balanced the hard work of daily life, reminding citizens of their unity and shared identity. Art and innovation, the art of Meru, reflected both continuity and change. Pyramids continued to be built, though with distinctive features. Statues and carvings depicted rulers in regal poses, often blending Egyptian and African styles. Metalwork flourished thanks to the iron industry, producing not only tools, but also ornate jewelry and ceremonial weapons. Pottery remained a beloved craft, with vessels decorated in bright colors and bold patterns. Writing also evolved in Meru, while Egyptian hieroglyphs were still used. The Kushites developed their own Meroitic script, one of the oldest written languages of Africa. Though not fully deciphered today, this script represents a major cultural achievement, evidence of a literate society with its own identity. Meru's influence beyond its borders, the wealth and power of Meru, extended far beyond its city walls. Through trade and diplomacy, it influenced regions deep in Africa and across the Mediterranean. Envoys carried gifts to Roman emperors, and Roman writers noted the strength of the Kushite queens, who resisted their armies. Meru was not isolated, but connected, shaping and being shaped by the wider ancient world. Its iron, gold, and ivory were treasures sought by many, and its culture stood proudly as uniquely African, yet globally engaged. The pyramids of Meru just outside the city. The desert holds one of Meru's most breathtaking legacies. The royal pyramids, smaller and steeper than those of Egypt, they formed clusters where kings and queens were buried. Each pyramid once bore inscriptions and carvings, telling the story of the ruler within. Though centuries of tomb robbing have left them damaged, their presence still owes visitors today. Standing among them, one feels the weight of history and the ambition of a people who sought eternity in stone. The lasting symbol of Meru thrived for centuries, its wealth drawn from iron, trade, and fertile land. It stood as a beacon of power long after Egypt had fallen to foreign rule. Its pyramids, temples, and slag heaps are more than ruins. They are symbols of a civilization that found strength not only in survival but in creativity and innovation. When the sun sets over the desert, casting shadows over the pyramids of Meru, the silence whispers of blacksmiths at their forges, merchants in the markets, and rulers gazing proudly at their city. Meru was not just a capital, it was the soul of a kingdom, and its story remains etched in the sands of time. Chapter 11. Kendakes, the warrior queens of Kushwin, the ancient world thought of kings. It often imagined men, rulers in crowns, seated on thrones, commanding armies and subjects alike. Yet in the kingdom of Kush, history took a different turn. Here women did not only share power, they sometimes ruled outright. They were known as the Kendakes, a title that would echo through time, symbolizing authority, wisdom, and fierce determination. The Kendakes of Kush were not queens in the shadow of their husbands. They were leaders in their own right. They commanded armies, negotiated with emperors, oversaw temples, and guided their people with strength and vision. Their images carved in stone show them towering over enemies, holding bows, spears, and symbols of divine authority. Their legacy challenges the assumptions of the ancient world, reminding us that power has never belonged to one gender alone. The title of Kandakith, word Kandakith, sometimes spelled Candace, was not simply a name, but a title, passed down from one queen to the next. Much like the word Pharaoh in Egypt, or Caesar in Rome, Kandake denoted a position of royal authority. In the Kushite system, power could be shared between kings and queens. Sometimes the Kandake was the mother of the king, acting as regent and guiding her son during his early reign. At other times, she ruled as sovereign, wielding full power. This blending of roles, mother, queen, ruler, gave the Kandakes a unique place in history. They embodied the strength of women, the wisdom of elders, and the authority of the crown. A world that took notice. The Kandakes were not figures hidden within Kush alone. The wider world took notice of them, especially during the turbulent centuries, when Rome extended its influence into Egypt. Roman writers, fascinated by these powerful women, recorded stories of Kandakes who faced their armies. These accounts, though sometimes colored by exaggeration or misunderstanding, reveal the respect and sometimes fear that the Kandakes inspired among foreign powers. To the Romans, who were accustomed to patriarchal rule, the sight of a queen commanding warriors was extraordinary. To the Kushites, it was natural. Amanirenas, the fierce defender. Among the most celebrated Kandakes was Amanirenas, who ruled during the 1st century BCE. She is remembered for her courage in defending her kingdom against Rome itself. The story begins with Augustus, the first Roman emperor, who sought to extend his power into Nubia after annexing Egypt. Roman forces marched south, expecting an easy conquest. Instead, they met fierce resistance led by Amanirenas. According to accounts, Amanirenas lost an eye in battle, earning her the title of the One-Eyed Queen. Yet this did not weaken her resolve. With determination, she struck back, leading her people in a war that saw Kushite warriors raid Roman forts and even carry away statues of Augustus as trophies, though the war eventually ended in a peace treaty. The outcome was remarkable. Unlike many lands conquered by Rome, Kush remained independent. This was due not only to military might, but to the leadership of a Kendake, who refused to bow before an empire. Amanishakheto, wealth and power. Another Kendake, Amanishakheto, ruled during the 1st century CE. Her reign is remembered for prosperity and artistic achievement. Archaeologists discovered treasures in her tomb, including jewelry of gold and precious stones, which testify to the wealth of her time. Power is also reflected in temple carvings. In one striking scene, she is shown holding captives by the hair, towering over them in triumph. This imagery was not mere symbolism. It proclaimed to all who saw it that the Kandake was sovereign, feared by her enemies, and blessed by the gods. Her reign reminds us that power was not only about war, but also about the flourishing of culture and wealth. Under her guidance, Meru continued to thrive as a center of industry and trade. The dual authority of king and queen. The Kandakes did not always rule alone. Often their authority intertwined with that of kings. Together, they formed a dual system of governance that balanced masculine and feminine power. This arrangement gave Kush a stability that other kingdoms sometimes lacked. While kings led armies and upheld traditions, queens provided continuity across generations, serving as advisors, regents, or the Kandake ensured that royal bloodlines remained strong and that power did not falter when kings died young or faced challenges. In this sense, the Kandake was more than a ruler. She was the backbone of the dynasty. Religious authority. The Kandake also wielded influence in spiritual matters. Temples in Meru and Napata depict them making offerings to gods, standing side by side with kings. In some cases, they are shown larger than life, towering even over their male counterparts, symbolizing their central role in divine worship. The lion-headed god, Apidmuk, a uniquely Kushite deity, often appears alongside Kandake. His strength and ferocity mirrored their own, reinforcing their role as protectors of the kingdom by bridging the human and divine. The Kandakes legitimized their power, not just politically, but spiritually. A different vision of womanhood, the Kandakes challenge modern assumptions about the past. Too often, history paints women of the ancient world as confined to households or defined only by marriage. Yet in Kush, women were rulers, generals, and high priests, their images carved into stone towering, commanding, armed with spears and bows of her, a vision of womanhood that is powerful and active. They remind us that in some corners of history, the balance between genders was far more equal than we might expect. For the people of Kush, this was not unusual. For us today, it is inspiring. Everyday women, in the shadow of queens, the power of the Kandakes likely influenced the lives of ordinary women as well. In a society where queens ruled and commanded armies, it is likely that women in villages and cities enjoyed greater respect and opportunities than in other ancient cultures. Inscriptions suggest that women owned property, engaged in trade, and participated in religious rituals. They were not silent figures in the background, but active members of society. The Kandakes stood as examples, proving that strength and wisdom were not confined to men alone. The enduring legacy, though, centuries have passed. The legacy of the Kandakes endures. Their pyramids still rise in the deserts of Sudan. Their carvings still depict them in triumph, and their names echo in the records of Rome. They represent a rare moment in history, when women not only shared power, but sometimes embodied it entirely. Their reigns remind us that leadership takes many forms, and that courage knows no boundaries of gender. When we speak of Amunarina's leading warriors against Rome, or Amunishakato ruling in wealth and splendor, we speak of figures who transcend time. They stand as symbols of resilience, strength, and the unbreakable spirit of Kush. A quiet reflection as night falls over the pyramids of Meru. One can imagine the Kandakes watching over their kingdom, their gaze eternal. The winds whisper their names through the desert, carrying their stories into the present. For those seeking rest, their tale offers a gentle lesson that even in the harshest times, courage and wisdom can shine. That leadership may be found in unexpected places, and that the voices of women, too often silenced in history, once commanded nations and faced empires. The Kandakes of Kush remind us that power is not always loud. Sometimes it is steady, unwavering, and eternal, like the desert stars that still shine above their ancient land. Chapter 12. The Temples of Nubia. The Nile drifts in silence, but its banks are never empty. Rising from the sands, carved into cliffs, or standing alone in the desert, temples mark its flow. They are not only stones, they are voices, voices of kings, voices of gods, voices of people who once believed that to carve in stone was to carve eternity. In Nubia, temples were more than sanctuaries. They were meeting places of two worlds. Egyptian pharaohs built shrines along the river to mark their power, but Nubian kings and queens shaped them into their own, fusing foreign forms with native spirit. These were the temples of the Black Land, sanctuaries where gods of the north met gods of the south, where the desert's silence was broken by prayer, incense, and drums. The sacred mountain, Jebel Barkal. At the heart of Nubia's spiritual life stood Jebel Barkal, the pure mountain, rising above the desert near Napata. Its sandstone cliff and pinnacle cast long shadows across the river. Egyptians, when they reached it, declared it the home of Amen, the hidden god. Nubians agreed, but made it their own. Here, kings of Kush built temples that linked them to divine power. The cliff itself was sacred, a natural monument shaped like the uraeus serpent of royalty. Beneath it, shrines were carved, halls were raised, and statues were placed in dark chambers, where gods could dwell unseen. Kings were crowned here, queens too. To stand in the shadow of Jebel Barkal was to stand in the presence of eternity. Egyptian shadows, Nubian light. Many temples of Nubia were first built by Egyptian pharaohs during their conquests. Temples at Solab, Amara, and Abu Simbel were meant to project Egyptian dominance. Columns rose in Egyptian style, reliefs showed pharaohs smiting Nubians, and inscriptions praised the gods of the north. But time shifted power. When Egypt waned, Nubians reclaimed these temples. They repaired them, repurposed them, and sometimes reimagined them. Reliefs of Egyptian kings stood beside new carvings of Kushite rulers. Gods were honored under new names. What began as monuments of conquest became symbols of continuity. Stone does not forget, but it can be reinterpreted. Abu Simbel, the colossus in the rock, perhaps the most famous temple in Nubia, is Abu Simbel, cut into the cliffs by Pharaoh Ramesses II. For colossal statues of the pharaoh guard its entrance, staring across the desert with eternal vigilance. Within, halls stretched deep into the rock, lined with images of gods and victories. Yet Abu Simbel was not only Egyptian, it stood in Nubian land, facing Nubian people. The presence of such colossal gods in the south forever shaped Nubian memory. Long after Ramesses was gone, the temple remained. When Nubians rose to power, they too claimed the temple's shadow. Its walls became part of their landscape, its gods part of their pantheon. In the desert silence, the temple belonged to both lands. Solab, a forgotten splendor. Another temple. Solab, built by Pharaoh Amenhotep III, was once a gleaming sanctuary of sandstone columns. Today, its ruins stand like broken teeth in the desert. But in its time, it rivaled the temples of Thebes. Nubians, inheriting Solab, left their marks. Inscriptions of Kushite rulers mingle with those of Egyptians. The god Amen, worshipped in both north and south, bound them together. To walk among its columns today is to feel the ghost of incense, the echo of chants, the weight of centuries pressing through stone. Nubian innovation, the Meroitic temples in later centuries. During the time of Meru, Nubian temples took on their own style. Smaller, steeper, more intimate than Egyptian monuments, they reflected a shift. Reliefs showed queens as prominently as kings. Gods appeared with Nubian features. Rituals blended African tradition with Egyptian form. At Musawarat Izu Sofra, vast temple complexes rose, with courtyards, reservoirs, and mysterious carvings of elephants. The site's purpose is still debated. Was it a sanctuary, a school, a royal retreat? Whatever it was, it reveals the unique creativity of Nubian sacred life. Temples as political power. Temples were not only places of worship, they were instruments of politics. To build a temple was to claim land, to declare authority, to link one's reign to divine approval. Egyptian pharaohs built them in Nubia to mark conquest. Nubian rulers repaired them to show legitimacy. In every stone, a message was carved. We belong here. The gods walk with us. The silence of ruins today. Many of these temples are ruins. Sand has swallowed walls. Statues lie broken. At Abu Simbel, the river's rising waters once threatened to drown the temple itself, until modern engineers cut it free and raised it on higher ground. But even in ruin, their silence speaks. The columns of Solab, the cliff of Jebel Barkal, the shadows of Abu Simbel, They remind us that Nubia was not only a land of warriors and kings, but of priests, rituals, and faith. Closing reflections, the temples of Nubia stand as bridges between two worlds. They tell of conquest and resistance, of adoption and transformation. Egyptian in origin, Nubian in spirit, they embody the dialogue of centuries. When you stand at Jebel Barkal at dusk, the cliff glows red, and the mountain's shadow falls across the river. In that shadow, kings were crowned, queens prayed, and gods were invoked. And even now, the silence is not empty. It is full of echoes, echoes of chants, of drums, of whispered prayers rising into the night. The temples endure, because stone remembers. Chapter 13. The Pyramids of Meru. The desert is a sea of silence. Its sands stretch unbroken, golden by day, silver by night. And then, on the horizon, shapes rise. Triangular, sharp, and steep. Dozens upon dozens of pyramids, clustered together, pointing like spears into the sky. This is Meru, the city of kings and queens, the cemetery of dynasties. Here, in the solitude of the Nubian desert, the rulers of Kush built their eternal homes. Not a handful, but hundreds. Pyramids, small, yet commanding. Guardians of the afterlife. They are not the pyramids of Egypt. They are smaller, steeper, darker, and stranger. They are uniquely Nubian. They are the pyramids of Meru, the city of the dead by the 6th century. BCE Meru had become the capital of Kush. Its streets thrummed with life, markets full of ivory, gold, iron, and incense. Caravans came and went, merchants crossed deserts, ships sailed the Nile. It was a city of trade, power, and iron furnaces. But to the east of the city, beyond its bustling life, rose a silent city, a necropolis of pyramids, built of sandstone. Each one housed a royal tomb. Kings, queens, princes, and princesses, all laid to rest in monuments rising above the desert floor. The necropolis grew for centuries, until more than 200 pyramids dotted the horizon. A different style, the pyramids of Meru, are not the massive stone giants of Giza. They are smaller, typically between 20 and 30 meters tall. Their sides are steep, rising sharply, giving them a slender elegance. At their base stands a small chapel, decorated with carvings. Inside, offerings were made to the gods, prayers spoken for the soul of the deceased. Beneath the pyramid, a shaft led down into burial chambers, where coffins, treasures, and sacred items were placed. Reliefs on the chapels show kings and queens in Nubian style, broad features, adorned in jewelry, holding weapons or offerings. Gods appear beside them, blessing, protecting, guiding. In these reliefs, queens are often as prominent as kings. The Kandaks, warrior queens of Kush, rest here as well. The wealth of the tombs, the pyramids once held treasures, golden jewelry, iron weapons, glass beads, pottery, and amulets. Though many tombs were plundered in antiquity, some treasures survived. The tomb of Queen Amanishakheto, before it was looted in the 19th century, contained vast golden ornaments, bracelets shaped like lions, necklaces, and rings, all proof of the wealth of Kush. Even fragments tell stories, beads of carnelian from distant lands, bronze mirrors, delicate carvings. The pyramids of Meru were not only tombs, they were treasuries of art, symbols of power carried into eternity. The silence of ruining the 19th century. European treasure hunters descended upon Meru. The most infamous was an Italian, Giuseppe Forlini, who in 1834 dynamited the tops off several pyramids, searching for gold. He found some, the treasures of Amanishakheto, but destroyed much in the process. Today, many pyramids lie damaged, their tops torn away, yet still, they stand. Dozens of sharp silhouettes against the desert sky. Their survival is a quiet defiance. Though looted, though scarred, They remain guardians of memory. A sacred landscape to walk among the pyramids of Meru is to step into another time. The air is dry, the sand soft beneath the feet. The pyramids cast long shadows, each one pointing toward the heavens. Archaeologists speak of kings and dynasties, of burial customs and trade. But when you stand there at dusk, all such words fade. You feel only the weight of presence, hundreds of rulers, their names forgotten, their power dissolved, yet their tombs eternal. The desert becomes a cathedral, its silence filled with unseen voices. Meaning beyond death, the pyramids of Meru reveal more than funerary customs. They reveal a vision of kingship. To be buried here was to join a lineage stretching back centuries, to claim a place in the sacred order of rulers. They also reveal resilience. Long after Egypt's pyramids were abandoned, long after pharaohs ceased to build such monuments, Nubia kept the tradition alive, not as an imitation, but as its own. The Kushites built pyramids not because Egypt had done so, but because they believed in their power. For them, the pyramid was not merely a tomb. It was a symbol of authority, of divinity, of eternal endurance. The pyramids of Meru stand as one of the world's great forgotten wonders. Smaller than Giza, less famous, yet perhaps more haunting. They rise in clusters, silent guardians of a kingdom too often overlooked. When the sun sets behind them, their silhouettes burn black against the fire of the sky. The desert grows cold, the stars appear, and in that moment, you sense what they were meant to be: stairways of stone, guiding kings and queens from earth to eternity. They remain because the desert keeps its secrets. They remain because memory is stronger than ruin. They remain because Meru was once a city of kings. Chapter 14. The Meroitic script. The desert is filled with silence. Yet, within that silence, ancient voices tried to speak across eternity. They carved into stone, inked onto papyrus, etched onto pottery. They wrote in a script unlike any other. Lines, circles, curves, symbols that still whisper with mystery. This was the Meroitic script, the written language of the kingdom of Kush. Born in the shadows of Egypt, yet different, independent, and uniquely Nubian. It is a script that both reveals and hides, for even now, much of its meaning is locked away, untranslated, half understood. The Meroitic script is not just writing. It is a riddle carved into stone, a secret voice of the Black Land, the birth of a script. For centuries, Nubia borrowed Egypt's writing. Hieroglyphs appeared on temples, stelae, and monuments, used to proclaim the power of kings. But as the Kushite kingdom grew at Meru, something changed. Around the 2nd century BCE, they created their own system of writing. It was partly inspired by Egypt. Some signs resemble hieroglyphs, yet it was different, faster, simpler, adapted to speech. It had two forms: Meroitic hieroglyphs, used mainly for monuments and religious inscriptions. Meroitic cursive, written with ink on papyrus or scratched on pottery, flowing more quickly, like everyday handwriting. This script allowed Nubians to record their language, a tongue separate from Egyptian, perhaps connected to later Sudanese languages. In creating it, they declared something powerful: we are not Egypt's shadow, we are our own. The mystery of meaning. Dozens of inscriptions survive. They appear on pyramid chapels, temple walls, offering tables, and funerary stelae. Some are long, some brief. They include names of kings and queens, lists of offerings, invocations of gods. But here lies the mystery. The Meroitic language has never been fully deciphered. Scholars can read the script, pronounce the words, but the meaning remains largely hidden. Only fragments are understood. Imagine standing before a stone, its surface filled with neat lines of script. You can sound the words aloud, the rhythm of a voice long gone, but their sense slips away. Like hearing a song in a forgotten tongue, its melody haunting, its meaning veiled. Echoes of a lost world. Why did the script fade? By the 4th century CE, the kingdom of Kush collapsed, and with it, its writing. Without continuity, the script was lost. No Rosetta Stone has been found for Meroitic, no bilingual text to unlock its secrets. Yet even in silence, the script speaks. It tells us that the Kushites valued language, identity, permanence. They could have continued using Egyptian hieroglyphs, but they did not. They forged their own path. In doing so, they left behind one of Africa's earliest written languages. Proof of a literate, sophisticated society, the living puzzle today. Archaeologists and linguists still labor over Meroitic inscriptions. Each sign is examined, each symbol compared, each fragment tested against living tongues of the Nile and Sahara. Some believe the key lies in the Nubian languages spoken today, distant descendants of Kushite speech. Others search among the relics of inscriptions, hoping for that one discovery that will break the code. Every uncovered stele, every fragment of pottery, every carved chapel wall is another piece of the puzzle. The desert may keep its secrets, but not forever. Writing is power. The ancient world, writing was not only communication, it was power. To carve a name in stone was to make it eternal. To record offerings was to ensure the gods remembered. To write the laws of kings was to give them divine weight. For Nubia, the Meroitic script was not simply practical, it was sacred. It was the tongue of rulers, the voice of priests, the mark of a kingdom that sought eternity. The Meroitic script lingers as a whisper in the desert, lines carved into stone, words frozen in time, waiting for understanding. It is both presence and absence. We see the letters, but their meaning hides. Perhaps that is fitting. Nubia itself is a kingdom, half remembered, half forgotten, standing in the shadows of Egypt. Its script, like its history, waits to be rediscovered. Stand before a pyramid chapel at Meru, its walls etched with Meroitic signs. The wind howls. Through the desert, the sun sets behind the stones. The letters gleam faintly, eternal yet unread. In that moment, you feel the truth, that the past still speaks, even when we cannot understand its words. The script is a riddle, but the riddle itself is a story. Chapter 15, The Economy of Kush. The desert may seem barren, empty, lifeless, but look closer, and you will see that the black land of Nubia was rich beyond measure. Gold gleamed in its sands. Ivory came from its elephants. Incense drifted from its trees, and from the depths of its earth, iron poured forth like fire. The kingdom of Kush was not only a land of kings and temples, it was a land of trade, wealth, and industry. Its economy was the foundation of its power, the heartbeat that kept its cities alive and its armies strong. To understand Kush is to understand how it thrived in a landscape of silence and stone. The gold of Nubia. From the earliest times, Nubia was famed for its gold. The Egyptians called it NBW gold, and from that word came the very name Nubia. The desert hills glittered with veins of ore, and miners dug deep shafts, breaking stone, crushing rock, washing dust to reveal yellow metal. Caravans carried the gold north to Egypt, where it adorned temples and crowns. Pharaohs coveted it, merchants demanded it, priests offered it to the gods. For centuries, Nubia was Egypt's treasure house, the source of the metal that symbolized eternity. Even in Kushite times, gold remained central. Kings and queens wore golden ornaments, buried themselves with jewelry, and offered gold to a man. In the pyramids of Meru, fragments of golden rings and bracelets still whisper of wealth carried into the afterlife. Ivory and exotic goods. Nubia was also a land of elephants. Herds roamed the savannas, their tusks harvested for ivory. Smooth, white, and prized, ivory was carved into furniture, ornaments, and amulets. Traders carried it north, where it fetched high prices in Egypt and beyond. But ivory was only part of the trade. From deeper Africa came incense, ebony, leopard skins, and ostrich feathers. Caravans trudged across deserts, their loads heavy with exotic goods. Nubia became the middle world, the link between sub-Saharan Africa and the Mediterranean. Every tusk, every bundle of incense, every carved bead that left Nubia carried with it a piece of Kushite wealth, iron, and the furnace fires. By the time of Meru, another source of power emerged, iron. The city was filled with furnaces, their fires glowing day and night. Blacksmiths smelted ore, hammered weapons, forged tools. Meru became one of the earliest industrial centers in Africa. Its iron spread across the land, spears for soldiers, hoes for farmers, axes for builders. Iron transformed Kush from a kingdom of gold to a kingdom of steel. The furnaces left their mark. Even today, archaeologists find mounds of slag, the waste of centuries of production. The earth itself is scarred by industry, proof that Mero's wealth came not only from trade, but from technology, agriculture, and the Nile. The Nile itself was the quiet foundation of the economy. Each year, its floods nourished the soil, allowing farmers to plant barley, wheat, millet, and dates. Herds of cattle grazed along its banks, providing meat, milk, and hides. Agriculture sustained the people, fed the cities, and stocked the storehouses. Without the Nile's rhythm, no kingdom could have flourished. Trade routes of the Black Land Kush lay at the crossroads of worlds. To the north was Egypt, gateway to the Mediterranean. To the east was the Red Sea, opening paths to Arabia and India. To the west stretched the deserts, dotted with oases. To the south lay sub-Saharan Africa, source of ivory, gold, and slaves. Caravans wound along dusty paths. Boats sailed the Nile, their sails full of desert winds. Traders exchanged goods in bustling markets, where Egyptian linen met Nubian gold. Arabian incense met Kushite iron. Mero's wealth came not only from what it produced, but from what it controlled. To pass through Nubia was to enter a kingdom of tolls, tariffs, and trade. Tribute and taxation. Kings of Kush drew wealth not only from trade, but from tribute. Conquered lands paid in goods, cattle, or gold. Farmers owed grain, merchants paid tolls, and nobles contributed riches. Temples, too, played their part. Offerings to the gods doubled as resources for the state. This system bound the kingdom. Together, wealth flowed upward, filling royal treasuries, funding armies, building temples, raising pyramids. Wealth and power. The economy of Kush was not merely material, it was political. Gold bought alliances, iron forged strength, trade routes brought influence. A wealthy kingdom was a stable kingdom, and Kush's prosperity underpinned its resilience against Egypt, Assyria, and Rome. But wealth also painted the kingdom's image. To foreign eyes, Nubia was the land of riches, the source of treasures. Pharaohs invaded it for gold, Romans raided it for ivory. To them, Kush was both rival and prize. The economy of Kush was the lifeblood of its greatness. Gold, ivory, iron, trade, and agriculture, each strand woven into the fabric of power. Without it, there would have been no pyramids at Meru, no Kandakes, no armies to challenge empires. Today, the furnaces are cold, the caravans gone, the fields dry. But the ruins of Meru still whisper of wealth. The slag heaps lie darkened. The sand. The pyramids glimmer faintly in the sun. And the river flows on, remembering the treasures it once carried north. The land may seem barren now, but once it was rich beyond measure, and in that richness lay the kingdom's soul. Chapter 16. Warriors of Kush. The desert wind whistles across the dunes. In its voice, you can almost hear the beat of drums, the tread of sandals, the twang of bowstrings. For Kush was not only a land of temples and pyramids, but of warriors. From the earliest days, the people of Nubia were famed for their strength, their skill, and above all, their bows. Egyptian scribes called them the Taseti, the land of the bow. To face a Nubian archer was to face death from a distance. Yet Kushite warriors were more than bowmen. They were horsemen, spearmen, shield-bearers, and generals who led armies against Egypt, Assyria, and even Rome. This is their story, the warriors of Kush, guardians of the Black Land, the bowmen of Nubia from the very beginning. Nubians were known as master archers. Their longbows were stronger and more accurate than those of their neighbors. Egyptian armies often recruited Nubians as mercenaries, praising their deadly skill. Reliefs show them with tall bows, longer than a man's height, able to pierce armor at a distance. To the Egyptians, they were both enemy and ally, feared in battle, yet valued as soldiers. To the Kushites themselves, the bow was more than a weapon. It was a symbol of identity, so much so that early Nubia was called Taseti, the land of the bow. In the hands of Kushite warriors, the bow gave the kingdom its edge, spears, shields, and horses. But Kushite armies were not made of archers alone. They fought with spears, large hide shields, and bronze or iron swords. By the time of Meru, cavalry became important, swift horsemen who could strike quickly and vanish into the desert. The use of horses set them apart. While Egyptian armies relied heavily on chariots, Kushite cavalry gave them speed across rough terrain. It was this combination of archers and horsemen that allowed Nubian armies to challenge larger powers. Against Egypt for centuries, Egypt and Nubia clashed. In the days of the New Kingdom, Egypt invaded Nubia, building fortresses to control it. Yet Nubian resistance never ceased. When Egypt weakened, Kushite kings struck back, marching north and eventually seizing the Pharaoh's crown in the 25th dynasty. Kushite warriors followed their kings into battle, defending Thebes, Memphis, and Napata. Their loyalty and skill made possible the brief unification of the Nile under Nubian rule. Against Assyrian, the 7th century BCE, the might of Assyria came crashing westward. Their armies were disciplined, brutal, armed with iron and siege engines. Pharaoh Taharka of Kush faced them in battle. The wars were fierce. Assyrian records describe victories, but they also record Kushite defiance. Even when Memphis fell, even when Thebes was sacked, the warriors of Kush did not vanish. They retreated south, regrouped, and endured. Though the Assyrians were mighty, they never broke Kush entirely. The warriors of Nubia carried their kingdom through the storm. Against Rome centuries later, another empire appeared, Rome. When Augustus seized Egypt, the Kushites struck north under the Kandake Nearest Kushite warriors raided Roman forts, seized statues, and forced Rome into war. The Romans retaliated with fire and steel, burning cities and temples. But the Kushite warriors resisted fiercely, ambushing Roman troops, defending their homeland. In the end, a treaty was signed on equal terms, a rare outcome against Rome. It was not only queens like Ammon-Arenas who made this possible, but the warriors who followed them, loyal and unyielding, training in spirit. What made the warriors of Kush so resilient? It was more than weapons. It was their spirit. From youth, boys learned to hunt, to ride, to shoot. The desert and savanna trained them in endurance. The Nile trained them in discipline. Warriors were not only soldiers, but protectors of their people, guardians of their land, and extensions of their gods. To fight was not simply to conquer, but to defend the order of the world. War and identity in Kush. War shaped identity. Kings were shown smiting enemies in reliefs, holding captives by the hair, raising weapons in triumph. Queens, too, were carved as warriors, towering over prisoners, holding spears. The image of the warrior was central to kingship and queenship alike. To be ruler of Kush was to be warrior of Kush. The warriors of Kush were more than fighters. They were symbols of resilience, of defiance, of the Black Land's will to survive. From the longbows of Taseti to the cavalry of Meru, they stood against empires and carved their place in history. When you stand among the ruins of Napata or Meru. You can almost hear them still, the thrum of bowstrings, the clash of shields, the gallop of hooves. The desert wind carries their memory, whispering of men and women who fought with courage in the face of empires. The land of the bow remains eternal. Chapter 17. The Religion of Kush. The desert holds silence, but within that silence linger echoes of prayers, chants, and offerings. In the kingdom of Kush, religion was not merely ritual. It was life itself, binding people to their land, their rulers, and their gods. The temples of Nubia rose like mountains of stone, their walls carved with images of deities who straddled both worlds, Egyptian and Nubian. To walk into a Kushite temple was to step into a place where two civilizations met. Egyptian gods stood beside Nubian ones, sharing space, sharing power. And above all, one deity reigned supreme in the hearts of Kushite kings, Amen, the Hidden One. A land between gods. Nubia's religion grew from two sources, its own ancient beliefs and the traditions borrowed from Egypt, long before pyramids or temples. The people of the Nile's southern stretches worshipped spirits of the earth, the river, and the sky. Fertility gods, lion-headed deities, and ancestral spirits shaped early life. When Egypt expanded into Nubia, Egyptian gods followed: Ra, Isis, Osiris, Horus. But the Nubians did not abandon their own. Instead, they blended the two. Over centuries, this fusion created a religion unlike any other, uniquely Kushite, yet unmistakably connected to Egypt. The great god Amen, O God, was more important than Amen. At Napata, his temple, at Jebel Barkal, rose at the foot of the sacred mountain, a holy place believed to be the dwelling of the hidden god. Kushite kings claimed their power through him. They were chosen, not by men, but by Amen himself. Priests played a vital role, interpreting the will of Amen, guiding rulers, and legitimizing dynasties. Kings traveled to Jebel Barkal to be crowned in Amen's presence, binding their reign to divine authority. For centuries, Amen's shadow stretched across the desert. His temple, the spiritual heart of Kush, the lion god, a Petimoch-Bat Nubia, had gods of its own. Foremost among them was Apedmoch, the lion-headed warrior god. He was not Egyptian, but purely Kushite, a god of battle, strength, and kingship. His temples at Naka and Meru show him towering above captives, a fierce protector of the kingdom. Apedmoch imagery is bold: a lion's head, a man's body, wielding power. He reflects the spirit of Kushite kings, proud, independent, distinct. Through him, we glimpse a side of Kushite religion, untouched by Egyptian influence. Temples and rituals. Temples dotted the land at Napata, Meru, Naka, Musawarat, Isa. They were not silent monuments, but living centers of worship. Priests offered food and incense, sacrifices of cattle, music, and chants. Processions wound through temple courts. Statues of gods were carried on sacred boats, their presence blessing the people. In times of war, kings sought divine approval. In times of famine, they prayed for the river's flood. The temples were also centers of power. Wealth flowed into them, land was granted to them, and priests wielded influence alongside kings. Religion and politics were one. The afterlife beliefs. Like Egypt, Kush believed in an afterlife. Tombs were stocked with goods, food, and treasures for the journey beyond. Pyramids of Napata and Meru stand as testaments to this faith, rising from the desert as eternal markers of the soul's journey. Texts written in Meroitic script remain on funerary stelae, invoking gods and guiding spirits. Though their full meaning eludes us, their purpose is clear: to bridge this world and the next. Death, for the Kushites, was not an end. It was a passage into a realm where the gods reigned eternal. Women and religion queens, too, played sacred roles. The Kandakes were often depicted in temple reliefs, offering to the gods, sometimes shown with divine attributes themselves. Their power was not only political, but spiritual. In a kingdom where women could rule, religion gave them further legitimacy, weaving their authority into the divine order. A religion of blending Kushite. Religion cannot be separated into Egyptian and Nubian. It was both and more. It honored Isis and Osiris, but also Apedmak and local gods. It worshipped Amen at Jebel Barkal, but also invoked lion spirits, fertility forces, and ancestral powers. This blending created something resilient. Even when Egypt faded, Kush's religion endured. Even when Rome loomed, its temples still echoed with chants to gods old and new. The religion of Kush was the soul of the kingdom. It sanctified kings, strengthened queens, guided warriors, and comforted the dead. It blended the old with the new, the foreign with the native. Until something unique emerged, a faith rooted in the Black Land. When you stand before the ruins of Jebel Barkal, its cliffs glowing red at sunset, you feel the presence of gods, long silent. The wind rustles across broken temples, and in its murmur is the echo of prayers once offered to Amen, to Apedmak, to the spirits of Nubia. The gods of Kush may no longer be worshipped, but they are not forgotten. Their temples stand. Their names linger, and their shadows stretch across the desert still. Chapter 18. Temples of stone and sand. The desert is vast, and its silence is heavy. Yet within that silence, temples rise. Their stones are weathered, their reliefs faint, their gods forgotten by the living. But once, they were alive with chants, incense offerings, and the presence of kings. The kingdom of Kush built temples, not just as places of worship, but as symbols of permanence. Rising out of sand and stone, they declared power, faith, and identity. To walk through their ruins today is to step back into a world where architecture was a prayer carved in sandstone. The sacred mountain of Jebel Barkal at Napata, beneath the looming cliffs of Jebel Barkal, stood the kingdom's most sacred site. Egyptians once claimed the mountain was the home of Amen, the hidden god. The Kushites took this belief and made it their own. Here, temples were carved at the mountain's base, their walls adorned with images of kings embraced by gods. The mountain itself, shaped like a serpent's hood or a rearing cobra, was believed to be divine. It was no mere backdrop, but part of the sacred architecture itself. Every coronation, every offering, every act of devotion tied Kushite kings to Jebel Barkal, making it the spiritual heart of the kingdom. Naka and the temple of Apedmak east of the Nile, near the deserts of But, lies Naka, one of the jewels of Meroitic Kush. Its temples still stand, half buried in sand, their reliefs sharp even after 2,000 years. Here is the temple of Apedmak, the lion god of Kush. Carved into its walls is a stunning image, a Kushite king, immense and powerful, slaughtering enemies, watched by Apedmak himself. This temple is no copy of Egyptian style, but uniquely Nubian, with bold depictions of power and victory. Nearby stands a small but elegant, Roman-style kiosk, proof that Kush absorbed influences from many worlds, while still keeping its own character. Musawarat. Isufra deeper. In the desert lies a sprawling complex. Musawarat is, unlike other sites, it is vast, with courtyards, corridors, and reservoirs. Its purpose is still debated. Was it a temple, a pilgrimage site, a training ground for elephants? Perhaps all three. The reliefs show elephants and gods, kings and rituals. The architecture is labyrinthine, as if meant to overwhelm visitors with sacred mystery. Standing among its sandstone ruins, one feels the presence of something more than a temple, a center of both religion and spectacle. Meroe, a city of temples, the capital of Kush. Meroe was not only a city of pyramids, but also of temples. Shrines to Amen, Isis, and Apedmak lined its streets. Priests tended the gods, kings made offerings, and processions filled the air with music and incense. Though many are ruined, their stones scattered, the sheer number of temples at Meroe speaks of a kingdom deeply devoted to the divine. The blend of styles Kushite temples reveal a unique blend of influences. From Egypt came pylons, sanctuaries, and hieroglyphic texts. From local Nubian tradition came bold reliefs and lion imagery. From the Greco-Roman world came arches and kiosks. This fusion shows Kush not as an imitator, but as an innovator. Each temple is a declaration. We are Nubian, and yet we belong to the world. Ritual and daily life within the temples. Daily rituals sustained the gods. Priests washed statues, clothed them, fed them with offerings. Incense smoke curled upward. Drums beat softly. Hymns rose in the darkness. Festivals brought crowds, with statues carried outside, paraded on sacred boats. The temples were not only houses of gods, but economic centers, landowners, employers, and repositories of wealth. They bound religion, politics, and economy into one. Temples in ruin now. Most temples of Kush lie in ruin. Sand has swallowed many walls, winds have erased reliefs, and time has silenced their chants. Yet their stones endure. Stand among them, and you feel the weight of centuries pressing close. At Naka, the lion god still gazes from his temple. At Jebel Barkal, the sacred mountain still looms. At Musawarat, corridors still twist like a labyrinth. The gods may be gone, but their houses remain, closing reflections. The temples of Kush were not merely structures of stone. They were embodiments of belief, centers of life, symbols of endurance. Rising from the sands, they proclaimed that the kingdom of Kush was not a shadow of Egypt, but a world of its own. Today, the desert claims them, but their silence is not emptiness. It is memory. The wind moves through their ruined halls like a whisper of ancient prayers. The walls glow red at sunset, as they once did in the days of kings, stone and sand. Temple and desert both remain, eternal as the gods they once sheltered. Chapter 19. The decline of Kush. The desert does not change quickly. Its dunes move slowly. Its silence is eternal. Yet even kingdoms, mighty as they may seem, cannot escape the flow of time. The kingdom of Kush, which once challenged Egypt, fought Rome, and raised pyramids against the sky, began to fade. Its decline was not sudden, but a long unraveling, a slow erosion, like sandstone worn down by centuries of wind. The shadow of Meroe at its height. Meroe glittered with wealth. Its pyramids rose from the desert. Its furnaces glowed with fire. Its temples rang with hymns. But by the 3rd century CE, cracks appeared. Trade routes shifted, draining its lifeblood. The Red Sea ports grew in importance, bypassing the Nile. Caravans no longer flowed as they once had. The economy that had sustained kings and temples faltered. Gold mines ran dry, ivory herds dwindled, and iron could not feed an empire alone. Wealth trickled away, leaving the city vulnerable. The weight of Rome loomed large in the north. Though Kush had once fought it to a standstill, the empire's presence changed the balance of power. Roman Egypt dominated trade, controlled ports, and drew commerce northward. Kush remained independent, but in the shadow of a giant, it became harder to compete, harder to thrive. The memory of Amaniarenus's defiance lived on, but the reality was harsher. Rome was an obstacle too vast to overcome. Strained from within, the kingdom also faced struggles within. The priesthood of Amen at Jebel Barkal remained powerful, sometimes clashing with royal authority. Rivalries and succession disputes weakened stability. The distance between Napata Meru and the outer provinces stretched the kingdom thin, and beneath it all, ordinary people bore the strain. Farmers, traders, and artisans faced harder lives as wealth diminished. Temples lost offerings, pyramids became fewer, and once great cities began to shrink. The Aksumite storm, the final blow, came from the east. In the 4th century CE, the rising kingdom of Aksum, in what is now Ethiopia, grew powerful through trade along the Red Sea. Its armies marched westward, and around 350 CE, they struck Meru. The details are sparse, but archaeology and tradition agree. Meru fell. The city, that had once been the beating heart of Kush, was abandoned, its pyramids left to the sand, its furnaces silent. The kingdom of Kush, after 1,000 years, came to an end. The silence of the ruins, what remained, was silence. The pyramids stood, but no kings were buried. The temples stood, but no offerings were made. The script of Meru lingered on stones, but without voices to speak it, it became mute. The desert reclaimed the land. Cities crumbled, trade routes shifted south and east, and the memory of Kush faded into shadow. For centuries, travelers passed the ruins, without knowing their story. A legacy, not lost and yet. Decline is not erasure. Kush's spirit endured. Its art, its architecture, its pyramids, its memory of queens and warriors, lived on in echoes. Later Nubian kingdoms, Christian and Islamic, rose in its lands. The people of Sudan carried fragments of its culture into the present. Even in silence, Kush left a mark. Its pyramids still rise, more numerous than those of Egypt. Its temples still stand. Its script still whispers. Its story, though buried, was never destroyed. The decline of Kush was slow, inevitable, and final. Yet in its ruins, there is still life. Stand among the pyramids of Meru as the sun sets, and you feel not only loss, but endurance. The kingdom may have fallen, but the stones remain, eternal against the desert sky. Empires rise and fall, but the desert remembers. The decline of Kush was not its end. It was its transformation into memory. Chapter 2:0 Legacy of the Forgotten Kingdoms. The desert sleeps, but it does not forget. Beneath the sands lie pyramids, temples, scripts, and bones. They belong to a kingdom once mighty, once feared, once proud. The kingdom of Kush, though it has long since fallen silent, its legacy endures, carried by stone, memory, and the whispers of history. This is the story of what remains. More pyramids than Egypt. When people think of pyramids, they think of Egypt, yet Kush holds more pyramids than the land of the Pharaohs. At Napata and Meru, hundreds of small, steep pyramids rise from the desert. Their sharp silhouettes cut against the horizon like rows of eternal sentinels. They are different from Egypt's vast tombs, yet no less powerful. Each one marks a king, a queen, a noble, each one a statement of faith in life beyond death. Together, they remind the world that Kush was not a shadow, but a civilization in its own right. Queens, who defied empires in most of the ancient world, kings ruled, but in Kush, queens could wield power equal to or greater than men. The Kandaks stand as a legacy of female authority, warrior queens like arenas, who fought Rome and forced it into peace. Their memory is a reminder that power in Kush flowed differently, that women could lead armies, make treaties, and carve their names into eternity. Their example echoes even today, a legacy of strength and defiance. A script, left a Meroitic script, is part of this legacy, a writing system that remains half unknown. To see it carved on stone is to see a voice without sound, a message without translation. Scholars may one day unlock it, but even now, its mystery is powerful. It stands as a symbol of how much of Africa's past remains hidden, waiting to be uncovered. The script is not silence. It is a question still echoing in the present. The memory of resistance. Kush's legacy also lies in resistance. Again and again, it stood against greater empires, Egypt, Assyria, Rome, and again, it endured. Even in defeat, it survived. That spirit of resistance, of resilience, is a thread carried into later Nubian kingdoms and into the people of Sudan today. To remember Kush is to remember a people who never bowed easily, who carved their identity against the weight of empires. Forgotten, then found for centuries, Kush was forgotten. Travelers saw its ruins, but its story was unknown. Only in the 19th and 20th centuries did archaeologists begin to uncover the truth: the pyramids, the temples, the inscriptions. Even now, much remains buried. Every dig reveals something new: a fragment of pottery, a buried temple, a hidden tomb. The legacy of Kush is still being written, still being rediscovered. A legacy for Africa and the world. The story of Kush is not only Sudan's story, but Africa's story, and humanity's story. It proves that civilizations flourished beyond the Nile Delta, beyond the Mediterranean, beyond the familiar centers of history. Kush shows us that Africa was not silent, not empty, but full of kingdoms that traded, fought, built, and dreamed. It was part of the world, shaping and shaped by it. Its legacy is a reminder to look beyond familiar empires, and to listen to forgotten voices. The desert wind sighs across the pyramids of Meru. The sun sinks behind their sharp peaks. The sand glows red, the sky darkens, and the silence deepens. Kush is gone, but not gone. Its stones remain, its script waits, its queens and kings whisper from the shadows. Its legacy endures, not in books or scrolls alone, but in the very land of the Nile. The forgotten kingdoms are not forgotten anymore. And so, the sands fall silent once more. The kingdom of Kush has faded into shadow, but its pyramids, its queens, and its gods still whisper to those who dare to listen. The forgotten are never truly gone. They wait in the ruins, in the stones, in the stories we keep alive. If you have wandered this far into the night, I invite you to return. Subscribe to Dark History, where the past is never at rest, and every shadow hides another story.